The wind in West Texas did not simply blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 1,000 dry miles, picking up the loose topsoil of the Llano Estacado and flinging it against anything foolish enough to stand upright. On this late afternoon in November of 1874, the only things standing were the twist of mesquite trees, the bony spine of the Blue Hills to the north, and Catherine Hayes, Kate, as her father called her when he was not too tired to speak her name, leaned her weight against the cedar post, her boots digging into the cracked earth. She gripped the rusted handle of the fence stretcher, the muscles in her shoulders burning with a dull, familiar ache. "Pull it tight, girl," Samuel Hayes said, his voice stripped raw by the dust. "If we leave it slack, the steers will walk right through it like it is nothing but cobweb." Kate gritted her teeth and leaned back, using her body as a counterweight. The barbed wire sang a high, metallic note as it tightened. She watched her father step in, his hands gnarled and brown as old roots, and drive the staple home with a hammer that seemed too heavy for his arm. He struck the iron once, twice, a hollow sound that was swallowed instantly by the vast indifference of the plain. "That will hold," Samuel muttered. He wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt in the deep lines of his face. He looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to bleed into a bruised purple bruise against the earth. The light was unforgiving. It showed the truth of the Hayes Ranch without mercy. The grass was beaten flat and brown, whispering dryly in the gale. The creek, which had run clear and sweet when they first arrived 10 years ago, was now a sluggish, muddy ribbon retreating into the mud. Kate let the tool hang at her side. She looked at her father. Seeing the stoop in his shoulders that had grown more pronounced with every season, the rains failed to come. "We are losing 2 more heifers," she said quietly. "I saw them down by the wash. They are too weak to stand." Samuel did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the distance, where dust devils danced like ghosts across the pasture. "I know," he said. "We need feed. Pa, the winter grass is gone. I know. Catherine." His voice snapped, brittle as a dry twig. He turned to face her, his eyes pale blue and rimmed with red. "The account at the mercantile is closed," he said. "Mr. Henderson told me yesterday. No more credit until the balance is paid. $700. Kate, we might as well owe him the moon." Kate felt the cold wind bite through the wool of her bodice. She looked down at her hands. They were not the hands of a lady. They were chapped, the knuckles were swollen, the nails cut short and uneven. "There is a way," Samuel said, his tone shifting, becoming heavy with a pleading she hated more than his anger. "Edwin Carroll rode by this morning while you were at the creek." Kate felt a physical jolt in her stomach, a tightening that had nothing to do with hunger. She did not look up. "What did he want?" she asked. "He wants to set a date," Samuel said. "He says there is no sense in waiting until spring. He is ready to merge the herds. He says he will take on our debt as part of the dowry. He called it our salvation." Kate, salvation. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "He has 3,000 acres of prime bottomland," Samuel continued, almost to himself. "He has water rights that never run dry. You would never have to stretch a fence again. You would have a house with wood floors and glass windows." Kate looked up then, meeting her father's gaze. "And what does Edwin want in return?" "Pa, he is not a man who gives charity. He wants a wife," Samuel said sharply. "It is the way of the world. A man builds a kingdom, and he needs a woman to keep it. You are 22 years old. Catherine, Mary is already talking about sweethearts, and she is barely 17. You are running out of time, and we are running out of land." He turned and walked back toward the wagon, his limp pronounced. Kate stood alone by the mended fence. The wind whipped a loose strand of hair across her face, stinging her cheek. She looked toward the south, toward the sprawling Carroll Ranch that lay beyond the ridge. She felt the trap closing, not with a snap, but with the slow, crushing weight of a falling sky. By the time they returned to the homestead, night had fallen, thick and moonless. The ranch house was a low, sad structure of sod and timber, huddled against the wind as if trying to make itself small. Inside, the air was close and smelled of wood smoke and boiled beans. Mary was at the table, mending a tear in her Sunday dress. She looked up as they entered, her face bright and unlined, so different from the rest of them. She was the beauty of the family, soft and hopeful, protected from the worst of the labor by Kate and Samuel. "Did you see him?" Mary asked, her eyes dancing. "Did you see Mr. Caro?" Kate hung her hat on the peg near the door. "No," she said. "Pa says he was here." Mary said, biting a thread. "He says Mr. Caro brought a bolt of blue silk for you. It is on the chest. Real silk. Kate, imagine a dress made of that. You will look like a queen." Kate glanced at the wrapped parcel on the cedar chest. It looked less like a gift and more like a purchase price. She moved to the stove and began to ladle the beans onto tin plates. "He is handsome, too," Mary sighed. "He has such broad shoulders, and the way he rides, like he owns the ground the horse steps on." "He does own it," Kate said, setting a plate in front of her sister. "That is the point." Mary frowned. "You are always so sour. Most girls in the territory would give their right arm to catch Edwin Caro. He is rich. Kate." Kate sat down, her appetite gone. She remembered the barn dance in September. The air had been hot, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and cheap perfume. Edwin had cornered her near the feed bins. He had been drinking whiskey. The sour stench of it was on his breath. He had not asked her to dance. He had reached out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the tender flesh between the bones. When she tried to pull away, he had laughed, a low, wet sound, and pulled her closer until his chest was crushed against hers. "You are a strong mare," he had whispered, his lips wet against her ear. "I like a horse that needs breaking. It makes the ride worth it." Kate had shoved him away and run out into the cool night air, wiping her ear as if to scrub away the feel of his words. She had never told her father. Samuel would have been helpless to do anything, and the shame of it, the feeling of being handled like livestock, had silenced her. Now, sitting in the dim light of the tallow candle, Kate felt that same cold knot in her belly. She looked at her father, who was eating with mechanical efficiency, and her sister, who was dreaming of silk. "I am tired," Kate said, standing up. She went to the small partitioned corner that served as her room. She lay down on the corn husk mattress, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, shivering sound that rose and fell. It was answered by another, and then another. Kate stared up at the dark ceiling. She felt the walls of the house pressing in, the miles of fence pressing in, the debt pressing in. She was a piece of property being transferred to settle a ledger. The darkness felt heavy, like a hand covering her mouth. The next morning broke cold and gray, the sky the color of slate. Kate was on the porch, shaking out the rugs, when the dogs began to bark. They rushed toward the road, hackles raised. Kate shaded her eyes. A column of dust was approaching from the east. As it drew nearer, the shapes resolved into men on horseback, soldiers, a cavalry patrol from the fort, their blue coats dusted gray, their sabers clinking against their saddles. Samuel came out of the barn, a pitchfork in his hand. He stood beside Kate, his face hardening into a mask of suspicion. Blue bellies. He spat, probably looking for handouts or lost horses. Kate watched the column approach. At the head of the patrol, riding slightly apart from the officer, was a figure that did not belong. He rode a paint horse, smaller and wirier than the cavalry mounts. He wore a mixture of buckskin and army wool. His hair was black, long, and tied back with a strip of red cloth. He rode with a stillness that made the soldiers behind him look clumsy. "That is a Comanche," Samuel hissed. "Look at him, riding right up to my front door like he is decent folks." The patrol slowed. The officer, a young lieutenant with a sunburned nose, touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, folks," the lieutenant called out. "We are heading for Fort Concho. Wondering if we might water the horses at your tank." Samuel stayed silent for a long moment, gripping the pitchfork. "Water is low. Samuel said flatly. "But I will not deny a thirsty animal, even if the company they keep is questionable." He glared at the scout. The Comanche man did not react. He sat perfectly straight, his face turned toward the horizon, as if he were alone on the plain. Kate studied him. She had heard stories of the Comanche all her life, stories of fire and blood, of children taken in the night. Her brother Thomas had been 18 when he rode out to check the herd and never came back. They had found him 3 days later, his body bristling with arrows, his scalp gone. Since that day, Samuel Hayes had carried a hatred in his heart that was as hard and black as coal. Kate looked at the scout's face. It was a landscape of its own, high cheekbones, skin the color of polished copper, eyes that were dark and unreadable. He did not look at the house. He did not look at the soldiers. He looked at the wind. "Who is your scout?" Kate heard herself ask. The lieutenant glanced back. "That is Tahan, best tracker in the regiment. Do not let his looks scare you. Miss, he is tame enough. Works for the army now. He is a traitor to his own and a curse to us." Samuel muttered loud enough to be heard. "I do not want him stepping foot off that horse. Lieutenant." The scout turned his head then. For a brief second, his eyes met Kate's. There was no anger in them, no shame. There was only a profound, terrifying emptiness, like the bottom of a dry well. Then he looked away, guiding his horse toward the water tank without a word. Kate felt a shiver run down her spine. It was not fear, exactly. It was the shock of recognizing something familiar in that emptiness. He looked the way she felt, trapped in a uniform that did not fit, serving masters who despised him, after the soldiers had watered their horses and ridden on, leaving only dust and the smell of horse sweat. Samuel stood on the porch and spat on the ground. "If I had my rifle, I would have dropped him," Samuel said. "Riding with the men who killed his kin, he has no honor. A man with no loyalty is no man at all." Kate went back inside, but the image of the scout's straight back and silent endurance stayed with her. 2 days later, the letter came. A rider from the Caro Ranch delivered it. It was addressed to Samuel, but the command was for Kate. Edwin had arranged for the wedding to take place in the town of Split Rock, 50 miles to the east. He had business there, and he wanted to combine the trip with the ceremony. He had purchased a ticket for Kate on the stagecoach that would pass through the crossroads the following morning. "She is to bring her trunk," the letter read, in Edwin's heavy, slashing handwriting. "I have arranged for rooms at the hotel. We will be married on Saturday. Tell her to wear the blue silk." Samuel put the letter down on the table. "You leave at dawn," he said. Kate stood by the window, looking out at the failing light. "I do not want to go." "Pa, there is no wanting." "Catherine," Samuel said, his voice tired, "there is only doing. The ranch is finished without him. Do you want to see Mary starving? Do you want to see me begging on the street?" Kate closed her eyes. She saw Edwin's hand on her wrist. She saw the endless line of fences. "No, Pa," she whispered. "Then pack your things." That night, Kate packed the small trunk that had belonged to her mother. She did not pack the blue silk. She left it on the chest, gleaming in the candlelight like an accusation. Instead, she packed her 3 worn calico dresses, gray and brown. She packed her mother's Bible, the leather cover soft from years of handling. She packed a small volume of poetry she had traded a dozen eggs for years ago, Tennyson, and finally, she took a faded yellow ribbon from the bottom of her drawer. It had been in her mother's hair the day she died of fever. It smelled faintly of lavender and old sorrow. Kate held the ribbon to her nose, breathing in the ghost of a time when there was softness in the world. Then she placed it in the trunk and closed the lid. The latch clicked shut with a sound like a prison door. The morning of the departure was bitter cold. A frost had settled over the mesquite, turning the thorns into silver needles. Samuel drove Kate to the crossroads in the buckboard wagon. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The stagecoach was already there, a hulking shape of red wood and iron, the horses stamping their feet and blowing clouds of steam into the air. The driver was a man named Silas, wrapped in a buffalo coat that had seen better decades. He was checking the harness, spitting a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dust. "Morning, Hayes," Silas grunted. "She ready?" "She is ready," Samuel said. He lifted Kate's trunk and strapped it to the rear rack. Then he turned to her. He did not hug her. He took her gloved hand and squeezed it once. Awkwardly. "You are doing the right thing. Kate, you will have a good life. A safe life." Kate looked at her father. She saw the fear in his eyes, the relief that one burden was being lifted, even if the price was her freedom. "Goodbye, Pa," she said. She climbed into the coach. The interior was cramped and smelled of damp wool and stale cigar smoke. There were 3 other passengers. On the forward-facing bench sat a couple, clinging to each other as if the coach were a life raft. The woman was small and bird-like, wearing a bonnet that hid her face. The man was pale, wearing a suit that was too thin for the weather. On the bench opposite them sat a man with a large mustache and a plaid suit. He had a sample case on his knees and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Room for one more lovely lady," the salesman boomed. Scooting over to make space, "The name is Pendergast, traveling in elixirs and tonics, guaranteed to cure everything from gout to melancholia." Kate nodded briefly and sat down, tucking her skirts around her legs. She pressed her shoulder against the wooden wall of the coach, trying to make herself as small as possible. Silas cracked his whip, a sound like a pistol shot. The coach lurched forward, the wheels grinding in the frozen ruts. Kate watched through the dusty window as her father stood by the wagon, growing smaller and smaller until he was just a dark mark against the immense, pale sky. Then the road turned, and he was gone. The journey was a punishment. The coach had no springs to speak of, and every rock and pothole sent a jolt up Kate's spine. The dust seeped through the cracks in the floorboards, coating her throat and eyes. "Mr." Pendergast did not stop talking. He talked about the weather. He talked about the price of corn. He talked about the Indian troubles to the north, seeming to relish the gory details. "They say corn's band is off the reservation again," Pendergast said, leaning forward. "Burning farms not 20 miles from here. Scalped a family of 4 last week. Left nothing but the chimney standing." The bird-like woman gave a small whimper and buried her face in her husband's shoulder. "Hush now," the husband said, glaring at Pendergast. "You are frightening my wife. Just stating facts." "Friend," Pendergast said, winking at Kate. "But do not worry, little lady, I carry a peacemaker right here in my coat. If any savage tries to stop this coach, he will meet his maker before he hits the ground." Kate looked out the window. The landscape was changing. The flat plains were giving way to broken country, low limestone hills, deep arroyos choked with brush, and strange, twisted rock formations. It was lonely country, empty. The sun climbed higher, burning off the frost but bringing no warmth. Only a glaring, white light. The hours stretched out. Kate fell into a half-doze, the rhythm of the wheels becoming a hypnotic drone. She dreamed she was back in the barn, but it was not Edwin holding her wrist. It was the wind, and no matter how hard she pulled, she could not break free. She woke with a start when the coach slowed. The rhythm of the horse's hooves had changed. They were no longer trotting. They were walking, the harness jingling nervously. Kate sat up. The air inside the coach had grown tense. "Mr." Pendergast had stopped talking. He was gripping his sample case, his eyes darting to the windows. "Why are we slowing down?" the husband asked, his voice high and thin. "Driver sees something," Pendergast muttered. Kate wiped a circle in the dust on the glass and looked out. They were entering a narrow cut between 2 ridges. The walls of the canyon were steep and dotted with boulders. It was a perfect choke point. Above the creak of the wheels, Kate heard Silas shout something to the horses. A curse. Then the crack of the whip. The coach surged forward, throwing Kate back against the seat. Then the world exploded. A sound like tearing canvas ripped through the air. Gunfire. Not one shot, but a volley. It echoed off the canyon walls, magnified and terrifying. One of the lead horses screamed, a terrible, human sound. The coach slewed violently to the left. Kate grabbed the leather strap by the window, her knuckles white. "Get down!" Pendergast shouted. Fumbling inside his coat, another volley. Wood splintered inches from Kate's head. A hole appeared in the roof of the coach, letting in a shaft of sunlight. The bird-like woman screamed, a high, piercing shriek that cut through the thunder of the hooves. The coach hit a rock. It went airborne for a second, a sickening weightlessness, and then crashed down hard. The wheel on Kate's side shattered. The world tilted. Kate was thrown across the carriage. She hit the opposite door hard, her head cracking against the wood. Sparks danced in her vision. She tasted copper, blood. She felt the heavy weight of Mr. Pendergast landing on top of her, shouting something unintelligible. The coach dragged on its axle for another 20 yards, grinding and screeching, before grinding to a halt in a cloud of choking dust. Silence followed, sudden and heavy, broken only by the sobbing of the woman and the wheezing of a dying horse. Then came the voices. "Get them out!" someone yelled from outside. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The door above Kate, now the ceiling, was wrenched open. A face appeared, framed by a dirty hat and a bandana. Eyes cold as flint looked down at them. "Out!" the man ordered. "Now! Or we burn the wagon with you in it! Mister!" Pendergast scrambled up, climbing out through the door with frantic haste. Kate lay dazed for a moment, her head throbbing. She touched her temple and her fingers came away red. She pushed herself up, her limbs shaking. She climbed out of the broken coach, dropping down onto the rocky ground. The scene was chaos. The horses were a tangle of leather and blood. Silas, the driver, was slumped over the box, an arrow sticking out of his shoulder, but he was gripping a shotgun. Groaning. 5 men on horseback surrounded them. They were not Indians. They were white men, rough-looking, their dusters flapping in the wind. Outlaws. Desperate men, as the driver had warned. The leader, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, leveled a pistol at Pendergast. "The wallet," he said, "and the case." Pendergast handed them over, his hands trembling so hard he dropped the wallet in the dust. The outlaw laughed and motioned to the others. "Check the woman," the leader said, pointing his gun at the young couple. One of the riders dismounted and grabbed the young husband, shoving him to his knees. He ripped the watch chain from the man's vest. Kate stood by the wheel, clutching the locket at her throat. It was the only thing of value she had, a picture of her mother inside. She backed away slowly, her boots scraping on the gravel. Movement caught her eye. One of the riders, a man with yellow teeth and a lazy eye, had circled behind her. He walked his horse closer, leaning over the saddle horn to look at her. "Well now," he said, his voice thick and slurring, "what do we have here?" He wasn't looking at her locket. He was looking at her. His gaze crawled over her like insects. It was the same look Edwin had given her in the barn, but stripped of all pretense of civilization. It was hungry. It was violent. He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He walked toward her, grinning. "You are a pretty little thing to be all the way out here," he said. Kate backed up until her back hit the wood of the overturned coach. She had nowhere to go. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man laughed. He reached out, his hand filthy and calloused. "Give me the necklace, girl," he said, "and then maybe we see what else you are hiding under those skirts." Kate froze. The memory of the barn superimposed itself over the canyon, the smell of whiskey, the rough grip, terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. She saw the other outlaws busy with the passengers. No one was looking at her. No one was coming. The man's hand closed around her upper arm. His grip was like iron. He yanked her forward, pulling her away from the coach. "Come here," he grunted. Kate struggled, digging her heels in, but she was nothing against his weight. He dragged her toward the brush, his breath hot and foul on her face. "Please," she gasped. "There is no please out here, darlin'," he sneered. He raised his hand to strike her, to quiet her struggles. Kate flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow. She felt the knife edge of panic severing her last thread of hope. She was going to die here, or worse. Then, from the ridge above, a rifle cracked. It was a single, precise sound, sharper than the outlaw's pistols. The man holding Kate jerked violently. His grip loosened. He looked down, a look of utter confusion on his face, as a blossom of red appeared on his shoulder. He staggered back, falling to his knees. Kate scrambled back, gasping for air. She looked up toward the ridge. Against the bright, indifferent sky, a silhouette rose from the rocks. A blue coat, a long rifle, and black hair blowing in the wind. Tahan. The shot from the ridge did not just break the silence, it shattered the air itself. Kate pressed her back against the rough wood of the overturned coach. Her breath caught in a throat choked with dust. The outlaw who had been reaching for her, the one with the yellow teeth and the intent to ruin, looked down at his own chest with an expression of dull surprise. He swayed, his boots scuffing the gravel, and then collapsed sideways, landing heavily in the scrub brush. Before Kate could scream, the ridge above them erupted. Blue-coated soldiers crested the rise, kneeling to fire with practiced discipline. Smoke puffed white against the blue sky, followed instantly by the crack and whine of lead. But it was the figure who had fired the first shot who held Kate's terrified gaze. Tahan did not ride down the slope. He seemed to flow down it. He had abandoned his horse for the steep descent, moving over the jagged rocks with a fluid, terrifying grace that no boot-wearing soldier could match. He held a Winchester rifle in one hand, using the terrain for cover, appearing and disappearing behind boulders as he closed the distance to the valley floor. The remaining outlaws, realizing their advantage was gone, scrambled for their mounts. "To the horses!" one screamed, firing wild shots back toward the soldiers. One of the bandits, trapped near the wreckage, saw his escape cut off. Desperation twisted his face. He lunged toward Kate, his hand outstretched, seeking a hostage to buy his life. Kate saw him coming. She tried to scramble backward, but her dress was caught on a splintered piece of the carriage door. She saw the glint of his pistol, the sweat on his upper lip. Then a shadow fell between them. Tahan had reached the bottom. He did not slow down. He struck the outlaw, not with a bullet, but with the stock of his rifle, a vicious horizontal swing that connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The outlaw spun and hit the ground, unconscious before he landed. Tahan spun, bringing the rifle up in a smooth arc, leveling it at the retreating riders. He fired once, twice. A horse stumbled far down the canyon, unseating its rider, who scrambled into the mesquite and vanished. Silence slammed back into the canyon, heavier than before. Kate stared. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was trembling so violently her teeth clicked together. The Comanche scout lowered his rifle. He turned slowly to face her. For the first time, Kate saw him not as a distant figure on a horse or a silhouette on a ridge, but as a man standing within arm's reach. The impact of his presence was physical. He was taller than he had looked from the porch, lean and roped with muscle under his buckskin shirt and army coat. His face was a landscape of sharp planes, high cheekbones that looked carved from granite, a nose that was straight and proud, and skin the color of the earth itself. There were scars. A thin white line ran along his jawbone, vanishing into his hair. Another marked the back of the hand that gripped the rifle. He crouched down, dropping to one knee beside her. The movement was controlled, silent. He did not crowd her. He kept a respectful distance. Yet he was close enough that she could smell wood smoke, leather, and the faint, metallic scent of gunpowder. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was low, a deep timbre that seemed to vibrate in the air. His English was clear, though the vowels were shaped with a cadence that belonged to a different tongue. Kate pressed her hand to her throat, clutching the locket. She stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting terrors. She had been raised on stories of his people, stories of brutality, of fires in the night, of women who were taken and never seen again. Her father's voice rang in her head. Savages, animals, and yet The outlaw lay in the dirt behind him, struck down by this man's hand. I do not know, she stammered. Tahan's eyes swept over her. They were dark, so dark the pupil was barely distinguishable from the iris. But they were not the dead, flat eyes she had expected. They were calm, intelligent, and they held a flicker of something that looked disquietingly like concern. "You are bleeding," he said, lifting a hand toward her temple but not touching her. Kate flinched. She scrambled back an inch, her boots scraping the dirt. "Do not touch me," she whispered. Tahan's hand stopped instantly in midair. He did not look offended. He simply lowered his hand to his knee. "The outlaw is gone. Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "you are safe." The soldiers were reaching them now, sliding their horses down the loose scree of the slope. A sergeant with a thick gray mustache and a face like a bulldog swung out of his saddle and landed heavily. "Report," the sergeant barked, his eyes scanning the carnage. "4 riders," Tahan said. "Standing up. 1 dead, 1 unconscious." 2 fled south. The sergeant swore, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. He walked over to the overturned coach, where the other passengers were beginning to crawl out. The bird-like woman was weeping hysterically, clutching her husband, whose face was pale and bloody from a gash on his forehead. "Mister." Pendergast was dusting off his suit, looking indignant and terrified in equal measure. Silas, the driver, was dead. He lay slumped against the wheel, the arrow in his chest a stark, brutal testament to the violence of the frontier, though the arrow had come from an outlaw trying to frame a raiding party, a detail Kate realized with a sudden jolt. The sergeant surveyed the scene, his face grim. He walked to the coach and kicked one of the wheels. The axle was snapped clean through. 2 of the team horses were dead. The other 2 were lame and shivering with panic. "We cannot take the coach," the sergeant announced. "It is finished." "What do you mean?" Pendergast demanded, his voice shrill. "I have merchandise. I have a schedule. You have your life." "Mister," the sergeant snapped, "consider yourself lucky." He turned to his men. "We are 20 miles from Fort Concho. We have wounded civilians. Private Miller. Check the lady's husband. He looks like he has a concussion. We cannot move him fast. We will have to rig a travois." The sergeant looked at Kate, then at Tahan. He rubbed his chin, the stubble rasping against his glove. "Miss Hayes," he said, "you are the only one unhurt and fit to ride." "I can ride," Kate said, standing up. Her legs felt like water, but she locked her knees. "I can ride with you." The sergeant shook his head. "We are going to be slow. We are carrying a dead man and a wounded one, and we have to move carefully in case those bandits double back with friends. But your father, he sent word that you were to be in Split Rock by Saturday without fail. Edwin Caro has sent a telegram to the fort commander expecting your safe arrival." Kate felt a cold prickle of dread. "What are you saying, Sergeant?" "I am saying I cannot guarantee your safety if you stay with this slow column," the sergeant said. "We are sitting ducks out here with a travois, but I can send a rider ahead to take you through the canyon cut. It cuts 10 miles off the trip. You will be at the fort by nightfall." He gestured to Tahan. "Tahan will take you." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the Comanche scout, who stood silently by the head of his paint horse, checking the cinch. "No," she said, her voice rising. "No, I will not go with him. Miss Hayes," the sergeant began. "He is an Indian," Kate said, the fear making her words sharp. "You cannot ask me to ride alone with him. My father, Edwin, they would never allow it." The sergeant sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "Miss Hayes, look around you. I have 3 men. 1 is digging a grave for your driver. 2 are rigging a stretcher. I am the only one left to guard this lot. Tahan is the best tracker I have. He knows this land better than the vultures do. If those outlaws come back, or if a real war party shows up, he is the only one who can get you through the Needle's Eye Pass unseen." "I will wait," Kate insisted. "I will walk if I have to." The sergeant stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hard whisper. "Listen to me, girl. Those men who attacked you, they saw your face. They know you are young and they know you are alone. If they come back while we are dragging a lame horse across the flats, I cannot protect you. Tahan can. He is a scout for the United States Army, and he answers to me. You will go with him, or you will likely end up dead or worse." Kate looked at the sergeant's eyes. They were hard, practical eyes. They told her the truth. She looked over at Tahan. He was not looking at her. He was adjusting the blanket on a spare army horse, his movements calm and methodical. He seemed completely indifferent to her fear, or perhaps simply used to it. I have no side saddle," she whispered, a ridiculous, trivial objection rising to her lips. "You will ride astride," the sergeant said. "It is not dignified, but it is better than dying." 10 minutes later, Kate stood beside a tall bay gelding. Her trunk had been left behind to be collected later. She carried only a small saddlebag with her mother's Bible and a canteen of water. Tahan mounted his paint horse in one fluid motion. He looked down at her. "Can you mount, Miss Hayes?" he asked. Kate gritted her teeth. She grabbed the pommel in the cantle, put her boot in the stirrup, and hauled herself up. Her skirts bunched awkwardly around her legs, exposing her ankles, and she felt a flush of shame heat her face. She yanked the fabric down as best she could. "Keep close," Tahan said. "We ride hard until we clear the ridge." He turned his horse and started up the slope without looking back. Kate kicked the bay into motion, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She glanced back once at the broken coach, the soldiers, and the fresh mound of earth where Silas lay. Then she followed the Comanche into the wilderness. The land grew larger as they rode. That was the only way Kate could describe it. Down on the road, the world had been defined by the ruts of the wheels and the window frame of the coach. Up here, in the broken country, the horizon stretched out until it hurt the eyes to look at it. It was a landscape of thorns, mesquite, prickly pear, catclaw acacia, everything that grew where had armor. The earth was red and cracked, baking under a sun that seemed determined to scour the life from the surface. Tahan did not stick to any trail Kate could see. He rode through dry washes where the sand was deep and white as bone. He guided them up rocky slopes where the horse's hooves clattered on flint. He moved with a purpose that was absolute. Kate rode behind him, her eyes fixed on his back. He wore his black hair in 2 braids now, wrapped in otter fur. The army coat was tied behind his saddle. He wore a buckskin shirt that was stained with sweat and travel. She watched his head move, constantly scanning, left, right, behind, up at the ridgeline. He was a creature of perpetual alertness. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of history and prejudice. Kate wanted to ask him where they were going, how far it was, but the words stuck in her throat. She gripped the reins until her gloves were damp with sweat. The heat grew oppressive. It was not just hot. It was a dry, sucking heat that pulled the moisture from her skin. Her lips felt like paper. Her throat was full of dust. After 2 hours, Tahan slowed his horse and raised a hand. He dismounted near a stand of scrub oak that offered a pitiful patch of shade. "We rest the horses," he said. 10 minutes. Kate slid down from the saddle. Her legs wobbled when her boots hit the ground. She stumbled slightly, and Tahan took a half-step toward her. His hand rising, "I am fine," she snapped, steadying herself against the horse's flank. Tahan nodded and turned away. He loosened the cinches on the saddles to let the horses breathe. He took his canteen and poured a small amount of water into his cupped hand, letting his horse lap it up, then wiped the moisture over the animal's nose. Only then did he drink himself. He took a small sip, swishing it in his mouth before swallowing. "Drink, Miss Hayes," he said, gesturing to her canteen. "But slowly. If you drink too fast, the sickness will take you." Kate uncorked her canteen. She wanted to gulp the water down, to flood her parched throat. But his warning held her back. She took a sip. The water was warm and tasted of tin, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She capped the canteen and looked at him. He was standing by the horses, looking back the way they had come. His eyes narrowed against the glare. "Why did you help us?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it. It sounded loud in the stillness. Tahan turned to look at her. His expression was impassive. "It is my job." he said. "My father says—" Kate hesitated, then pushed forward, driven by a need to understand the contradiction standing before her. "My father says your people are at war with us. He says you are a traitor for wearing that coat." Tahan's face did not change, but his eyes seemed to grow colder, remote. "Your father sees the world in one color," he said. "Why do you do it?" Kate asked again. "Why ride for the men who put you on reservations?" Tahan walked over to the shade and sat on a flat rock. He rested his hands on his knees. They were large hands, scarred and capable, because hunger has no pride. "Miss Hayes," he said. His voice was flat, stating a fact as undeniable as the sun. "The buffalo are gone. The antelope are few. My people were starving. The army promised rations, flour, beef, blankets, if the young men would scout." He looked up at her then, and the bitterness in his voice was like a razor blade hidden in silk. "I have a mother. I have nieces and nephews. If I ride with the soldiers, they get a ticket for beef. If I do not, they eat boiled grass. It is a simple choice." Kate fell silent. She thought of her own father, mending fences to pay a debt, selling his daughter to Edwin Caro to save the ranch. Hunger has no pride. The parallel struck her with the force of a blow, but she pushed it away. It was not the same. It could not be the same. "But they killed my brother," she said, her voice trembling. "Years ago. A raiding party. He was just a boy." Tahan held her gaze. He did not apologize. He did not look away. "And the soldiers killed my wife," he said softly. The words hung in the hot air. Kate's breath hitched. She was gathering plums near the river. Tahan continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrible. "The soldiers mistook the group for a war party. They fired into the brush. She was 19. He stood up abruptly, checking the sun. "We must ride," he said. "The day is short." He mounted his horse without waiting for her reply. Kate stood frozen for a moment, the horror of his words warring with the image of the savage she had built in her mind. She scrambled back into the saddle, her heart heavy, and followed him back into the glare. The terrain grew rougher as the afternoon wore on. They entered a labyrinth of canyons, where the walls rose high and red on either side, blocking out the wind but trapping the heat. The shadows stretched long and purple across the sand. Kate was exhausted. Every muscle in her body ached. Her skin felt tight and burned. She focused entirely on the sway of the horse's back, falling into a stupor of fatigue. She barely noticed when Tahan halted. "We camp here," he said. Kate looked around. They were in a small, box canyon, sheltered on three sides by rock walls. A small spring trickled from a crack in the stone, creating a pool of water no bigger than a wash basin. Surrounded by ferns, it was a hidden place, a secret place. "Slide down," Tahan said. Kate tried to dismount, but her legs refused to hold her. Her knees buckled as she hit the ground. Tahan was there instantly. He caught her by the arm, steadying her. His grip was firm but not bruising. "Steady," he murmured. "The ground is still moving for you. It will stop." Kate leaned against him for a fraction of a second, too weak to pull away. She felt the heat of his body through his shirt, the solid strength of him. Then she stepped back, flushing. "Thank you, Mr. Tahan," she said, the title feeling strange on her tongue. He nodded and released her. He moved with efficient economy. He unsaddled the horses and hobbled them near the patch of grass by the spring. He gathered driftwood, bleached white branches that had been washed down in some flash flood, and built a small fire in the lee of a large boulder. "We will keep the fire small," he said. "Smoke can be seen for miles." Dusk fell rapidly. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a deep, velvet blue. The stars came out, piercingly bright in the thin air. The temperature dropped like a stone. One moment Kate was sweating. The next, she was shivering. She sat near the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. Tahan approached her, holding a wool blanket from his saddle roll. "Take this," he said. "It will smell of horse," Kate thought. But when she took it, it smelled of sage and wood smoke. She wrapped it around her shoulders. grateful for the warmth. Tahan sat on the other side of the fire, cleaning his rifle with a rag. The firelight danced on his face, deepening the hollows of his cheeks and highlighting the scar on his jaw. "Show me your hand," he said suddenly. Kate looked at him. "My hand? You scraped it when the coach turned over, and your shoulder struck the door." "I am fine," she said automatically. "Infection kills as fast as a bullet out here," Tahan said. "Let me see." He did not demand. He asked. Kate hesitated, then slowly extended her right hand. The palm was raw, the skin abraded and dirty. Tahan set his rifle aside. He took a small pouch from his belt and a clean strip of cotton cloth. He poured a little water from the canteen onto the cloth and reached for her hand. Kate stiffened as his fingers brushed hers. Her muscles locked, a reflex born of the barn dance and Edwin's crushing grip. Tahan stopped. He did not pull her hand. He simply let his fingers rest lightly beneath hers. "I am not him," he said. He did not say who him was, but he didn't have to. Kate looked into his eyes and saw that he knew. He had seen the fear in her when the outlaw touched her. He understood. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding and relaxed her fingers. "Okay," she whispered. Tahan cleaned the wound with the gentle, precise strokes. The water stung, but his touch was incredibly light. He applied a salve from the pouch. It smelled of bear grease and herbs, and wrapped the cloth around her palm, tying it neatly. "Thank you," she said, her voice small. He nodded and moved back to his side of the fire. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crackle of the wood and the distant yip of coyotes. "You asked about the coat," Tahan said, staring into the flames. Kate looked up. "I wear it because it is a shield," he said. "When I wear the buckskin, I am a target for the white man. When I wear the blue wool, I am a target for the Comanche. But at least the blue wool comes with a rifle and a horse." "It sounds lonely," Kate said. "It is," he admitted. Kate pulled the blanket tighter. "My brother, Thomas, he was older than me. He used to carve horses out of driftwood for me. He wanted to see the ocean. He said he was going to ride all the way to California one day." Tahan listened. His head tilted slightly. He was a good brother. He was the best. When we found him, my father changed. The light went out of him. He only has room for the ranch and the debt now. And the hate is easy fuel, Tahan said softly. "It burns hot, but it leaves nothing but ash." Kate looked at him, surprised by the poetry of his words. "And your wife?" she asked, daring to tread on the sacred ground he had opened earlier. "What was her name?" Tahan was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. He picked up a twig and snapped it in two. "Nuna," he said. "It means land." She was quiet. She liked the early morning best, before the wind started. He threw the twig into the fire. "We had a son. He was 3 winters old. He died with her." Kate felt tears prick her eyes. The magnitude of his loss made her own troubles. The debt, Edwin, the marriage, feel small, and yet they were part of the same cruel tapestry. "I am so sorry," she whispered. Tahan looked at her across the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on his face, softening the harsh angles. For a moment, the barrier between them, the wall of race and war and history, thinned. They were just 2 people sitting in the dark, warming their hands over the same small tragedy. Suddenly, Tahan went rigid. His head snapped up, his eyes locked on the ridgeline above them. "What is it?" Kate asked, alarm spiking in her chest. "Shh!" Tahan moved instantly. He kicked dirt over the fire, extinguishing it in seconds. The darkness rushed in, absolute and blinding. He was beside her in a heartbeat. He crouched down, his hand gripping her shoulder, pressing her down against the cold rock wall. "Quiet," he breathed into her ear. Not a sound. Kate froze, her heart thundering so loud she was sure it could be heard for miles. For a long minute, she heard nothing but the wind. Then, she heard it, the clatter of hooves on stone, the creak of leather. Voices low and guttural, carried on the breeze. Riders, moving along the ridge above their canyon. Kate trembled. Tahan shifted his position, moving his body between her and the opening of the overhang. He raised his rifle, the barrel resting on his knee. She could feel the tension radiating off him, a coiled spring ready to snap. She could smell the scent of him, sage, horse, and man. In the terrifying dark, with unknown men riding above who might be outlaws or a war party, Kate realized with a jolt that she was not afraid of the man beside her. She was afraid for him, and she was afraid with him. The hoofbeats slowed, paused, and then picked up again, fading into the distance. The voices drifted away. Tahan did not move for a long time. He waited until the silence of the desert had fully returned. Then, he slowly lowered the rifle. "They are gone," he whispered. He turned his head. His face was inches from hers in the dark. She could feel the warmth of his breath. "Rest now, Miss Hayes," he said softly. "I will watch." Kate lay back against the stone, wrapped in the blanket. She watched the silhouette of his back against the stars. He did not sleep. He sat like a statue, guarding the darkness. And for the first time since she had left her father's porch, Kate Hayes closed her eyes and slept without fear. The sky did not darken gradually. It bruised. The change came from the north. A sudden, violent shift in the wind that swept away the dry heat of the afternoon and replaced it with a bite that tasted of iron and ice. The blue horizon was swallowed by a wall of clouds the color of a gun barrel, rolling over the plains with terrifying speed. A Texas norther. The old-timers called it. A storm that could drop the temperature by 40 degrees in the span of an hour. Kate Hayes huddled in her saddle, clutching the thin army blanket Tahan had given her. But the wind cut right through it. The rain began not as drops, but as stinging pellets of sleet that rattled against the brim of her bonnet and hissed into the dry grass. Within minutes, the sleet turned to a driving, freezing rain that soaked the shoulders of her dress and seeped into her boots. Tahan rode ahead, his head bowed against the gale. He had untied his heavy wool coat from the saddle and pulled it on, but he looked back at her frequently. His eyes narrowed against the sting of the weather. "We must stop," he shouted over the roar of the wind. Kate tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so violently that her jaw ached. She nodded, a jerky motion. She could not feel her fingers inside her leather gloves. Her feet felt like blocks of wood in the stirrups. The land here was broken, a maze of erosion and stone. Tahan guided his paint horse off the game trail and down into a narrow cut where the limestone walls rose high and jagged. The wind howled above them, a furious, shrieking thing. But down here, the air was slightly stiller, though no less cold. He found what he was looking for, a deep undercut in the canyon wall, little more than a shallow cave carved by centuries of flash floods. It was cramped and floored with sand, but it was dry. Tahan dismounted. He moved with a stiff urgency. He tied the horses to a hardy mesquite bush that grew near the wall, sheltering them as best he could. Then he came for her. Kate tried to swing her leg over the saddle, but her muscles refused to obey. She was shaking uncontrollably, a deep, bone-rattling shiver that made the world blur. She slid from the horse, her knees buckling the moment her boots hit the sand. She would have fallen if Tahan had not caught her. He practically lifted her into the shelter of the overhang, setting her down on a flat rock near the back wall. "Stay," he commanded. He worked with frantic speed. He gathered deadwood from the drift pile at the back of the undercut. Bleached, bone-dry branches. He shaved a piece of kindling with his knife, his hands steady despite the cold, and struck a spark. It took 3 tries before the tinder caught. A small flame licked up, growing stronger as he fed it twigs, then larger branches. The firelight bloomed, casting long, dancing shadows against the red stone. Kate leaned toward the warmth, but she could not feel it. The cold was inside her now. It sat in her chest like a heavy stone. Her sodden dress, heavy with water, clung to her skin like a shroud, sucking the heat from her body as fast as the fire could offer it. Tahan looked at her. In the firelight, his face was grave. He reached out and touched the sleeve of her dress. It was soaked through. "You are too wet, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice rough. The fire cannot fight this water. You are shaking too hard. Kate wrapped her arms around herself, trying to still the tremors. I will be fine, she stammered. I just need a moment. You do not have a moment, Tahan said bluntly. This is the sickness of the cold. If you stay in these wet clothes, you will not wake up in the morning. He stood up and unrolled his bedroll. He took out a thick gray wool blanket, dry and rough. You must take off the dress, he said. Kate looked at him, her eyes widening. The command cut through the haze of her hypothermia, triggering a flash of panic. No, she whispered. Miss Hayes, Tahan said, and his voice was not the voice of a servant or a scout, but of a man who knew death intimately. I have seen strong men die of the cold in weather better than this. Your lips are blue. Your hands are useless. You must dry the dress by the fire, or the cold will take you. He tossed the blanket onto the sand beside her. Wrap yourself in this. I will turn my back. He turned away, sitting cross-legged near the mouth of the overhang, facing the storm outside. He pulled his own coat tighter around him and sat perfectly still, a dark silhouette against the gray curtain of rain. Kate stared at the blanket. She knew he was right. She could feel the lethargy creeping into her limbs, the dangerous desire to just close her eyes and sleep. With fumbling, numb hands, she reached for the buttons of her bodice. She managed the top 3, though it took an eternity, but her dress was old-fashioned, a sturdy calico thing meant for ranch work, and it laced up the back from the waist to the shoulder blades. She reached behind her. Her fingers were stiff, devoid of sensation. She clawed at the laces, trying to find the knot, but her arms were shaking so hard she couldn't coordinate the movement. The wet leather of the laces had swollen and tightened. She struggled for a minute, 2 minutes, panic rising in her throat. She couldn't do it. She was trapped in the wet fabric, trapped in the cold. A sob of frustration escaped her lips. Tahan did not turn around. Are you managing, Miss Hayes? Kate dropped her hands to her lap. She felt tears hot and stinging against her frozen cheeks. The shame was a physical burn, hotter than the fire. She was helpless. She was at the mercy of a man she hardly knew, a man her father called a savage, a man the world told her to fear. But the cold was a knife, twisting deeper. No, she whispered. She took a breath, a ragged, hitching sound. Can you unlace my dress? I cannot reach. The silence that followed was heavy. Tahan did not move immediately. He sat there, staring out at the rain, his posture rigid. Then, slowly, he turned his head. He did not look at her body. He looked at her eyes. Are you sure, Miss Hayes? He asked quietly. His voice was low, devoid of any mockery or hunger. It was a question of absolute seriousness. He was giving her a choice, even when she had none. Kate nodded. She squeezed her eyes shut, her throat so tight she could barely speak. Yes, she choked out. Please! Tahan stood up. He moved to the back of the cave, coming up behind her. Kate heard the soft crunch of his moccasins on the sand. She felt his presence at her back, a wall of heat radiating from him. She tensed, every muscle in her body locking up. Waiting for the rough grab, the careless touch, the violation she had learned to expect from men who had power over her. She felt his fingers brush the fabric of her dress. He did not touch her skin. His hands were working at the knot, unseen. She could feel the concentration in his movements. The leather laces were wet and stubborn, but his fingers were strong and dexterous. He loosened the first loop, then the second. The pressure on her ribs eased. He worked his way up, loosening the bodice. His knuckles grazed her spine, a feather-light touch, there and gone. Kate flinched violently. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure fear. Tahan froze. His hands hovered in the air, inches from her back. Ka, he whispered, a word she did not know, soft and sharp. I am sorry. He did not revert to English immediately. He took a breath, and she could hear him steadying himself. I'm almost done, he said, his voice returning to the formal cadence he used with her. I will not touch you more than I must. Kate opened her eyes. She stared at the firelight dancing on the red rock wall. Tears blurred her vision. They were tears of humiliation. Yes, but also of a strange, overwhelming relief. He had stopped. He had apologized. He was treating her with a terrifying amount of respect. "It is okay," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Just finish it." He resumed. Quickly now. Efficiently. The laces went slack. The dress loosened completely. "It is done," Tahan said. He stepped back immediately, putting distance between them before the echo of his words had even faded. Kate pulled the dress down, her arms shaking. She grabbed the wool blanket and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, pulling it closed at the front before she slid the wet dress over her hips and kicked it away. She sat there, a bundle of gray wool, shivering violently as the blood began to return to her skin. Tahan picked up the wet dress with 2 sticks, as if it were something fragile, and draped it over a piece of driftwood near the fire. Steam began to rise from the fabric almost instantly. He did not look at her. He sat down on the opposite side of the fire, keeping the flames between them. He took off his own coat, which was damp on the shoulders, and laid it on a rock to dry. Beneath it, he wore the buckskin shirt, stained with travel. He looked tired. The firelight carved deep shadows under his eyes. Kate watched him. The shivering was subsiding, replaced by a dull ache in her limbs. She felt raw, exposed, and yet strangely safe. "Thank you," she whispered. Tahan poked the fire with a stick. A shower of sparks swirled up toward the soot-blackened ceiling. "You are welcome, Miss Hayes." Kate pulled the blanket tighter, tucking her chin into the rough wool. It smelled of him. Sage, smoke, horse, and man. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was an honest one. I do not like being touched," she said suddenly. The confession spilled out of her, unbidden. It was the first time she had said it aloud to anyone, not since, before. She saw Tahan's hand pause on the stick. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers through the veil of smoke. "I know," he said. "I was at a dance," she said, her voice sounding hollow in the cave. "A man. He grabbed me. He did not listen when I said no. He thought because he was strong, and because he was rich, he could take what he wanted." She looked down at the fire. "That is why I flinched. It was not you. It was the memory." Tahan watched her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were soft. "The memory is a heavy thing to carry," he said quietly. He looked away, toward the dark opening of the cave where the rain hissed. "My people say that the soul can be bruised, just like the body," he said. "When things are taken without consent, land, children, dignity, the bruise goes deep. It makes the skin sensitive." He looked back at her. "You have nothing to fear from me. Miss Hayes, I know what it is to have your world taken from you by hands that do not care." Kate looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars on his hands, the weary set of his shoulders. She realized that his stoicism was not a lack of feeling, but a dam holding back a river of grief. He was not a savage. He was a man who had survived the end of his world, just as she was trying to survive the end of hers. "I know," she said softly. I think I know that now. That." They sat in silence as the storm raged outside. Tahan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a strip of dried beef. He broke it in 2 and offered her the larger piece. "Eat," he said. "The fire warms the outside. The food warms the inside." Kate took the meat. Her fingers brushed his. She did not flinch. The next 2 days were a blur of travel. The storm broke by morning, leaving the world scoured clean and glittering with frost. The sky returned to a brilliant, heartless blue. They rode out of the canyonlands, the red rock giving way to rolling hills of brown grass that looked like the hide of a sleeping animal. The wind was still cold, but the sun had teeth again. Kate rode the bay gelding with a growing confidence. Her body ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of use. She watched Tahan constantly. She learned how he read the ground, A bent twig meant a deer had passed. A circling hawk meant a kill. A shift in the wind meant water. They spoke little, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was companionable. It was a shared space. On the afternoon of the second day, they came to the river. It was the Red River, swollen with the runoff from the storm. The water was brick red and churning, dragging whole trees in its current. It looked angry. "We must cross," Tahan said, shouting over the roar of the water. "The fort is on the other side, 10 miles south." He urged his paint horse into the water. Kate followed, her heart in her throat. The cold water rose up the horse's legs, swirling around her boots. The bay gelding stumbled on the shifting riverbed. Kate gasped as the horse lurched sideways. The current grabbed at them, powerful and relentless. She felt herself slipping from the saddle. "Tahan!" she cried out. He was there before the sound had left her lips. He turned his horse upstream, breaking the current for her. He reached out and grabbed the bridle of her horse with one hand, and with the other, he gripped her arm. "Hold on," he shouted. "Lean upstream." His hand on her arm was tight, an iron grip. But it was not the grip of a captor. It was an anchor. She looked at his hand, the dark skin, the white scar, and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it frightened her. He steadied her horse, guiding them both through the deepest channel until the water receded and the horses scrabbled up the muddy bank on the far side. They halted on the bank, dripping and breathless. Tahan released her arm. "Are you safe?" he asked. Kate nodded, wiping water from her face. "Yes, thank you." She looked at him, expecting him to turn away as he usually did, but he held her gaze for a long moment. There was a heat in his eyes that had nothing to do with the sun. It was the heat of adrenaline, of shared survival. "You ride well, Miss Hayes," he said. "Better than most men I know." Kate felt a flush rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the first compliment anyone had given her in years that felt like it belonged to her, not to her appearance or her utility. "Thank you." "Tahan," she said. She dropped the "Mr." He seemed to notice, a slight inclination of his head acknowledging the shift. "Look," he said, pointing south. Kate followed his gaze. In the distance, rising from the flat plain, was a column of gray smoke, and there, catching the sun, was the flutter of a flag. The stars and stripes, Fort Concho, civilization. Kate looked at the flag, and then she looked back at the empty, wild river they had just crossed. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss. As they approached the fort, the reality of the world she was returning to crashed down on her. The fort was a collection of limestone buildings and wooden stockades, an island of rigid order in the chaos of the plain. Men in blue uniforms walked the walls. A bugle call cut through the air, sharp and artificial. They rode toward the main gate. Kate saw the sentries on the wall turn. She saw them point. "Rider approaching," one shouted. "Looks like a woman. And an Indian." Kate stiffened. She saw the rifles shift, barrels resting on the wall. She looked at Tahan. He had straightened his back. His face had closed up again. The mask of the scout sliding back into place. He raised his hand, palm out, in a gesture of peace. "Open the gate," the sentry shouted down. "It's the scout, bringing in a stray." A stray. The word stung Kate like a slap. The heavy wooden gate swung open. They rode into the parade ground. The dust here was beaten flat by thousands of boots. The smell was different. Latrines, coal smoke, unwashed men, lye soap. Soldiers stopped their drilling to watch them pass. Kate felt their eyes crawling over her. Curious, judging. A woman alone on the plains. A woman riding with a Comanche. "Look at that," a corporal muttered as they passed, loud enough to be heard. "Tahan actually brought her back. I owe you $5. Miller, I thought for sure he would trade her for a pony." Laughter rippled through the group. Kate's face burned. She looked at Tahan. He stared straight ahead, his jaw locked tight, giving no sign that he had heard. But she saw his hand tighten on the reins until the knuckles were white. A man came running from the headquarters building, a captain, judging by his bars. He looked flustered. Miss Hayes? He called out. Miss Catherine Hayes? Kate halted her horse. Yes, she said, thank God, the captain said, reaching up to help her down. He ignored Tahan completely. We had reports of the ambush. The survivors came in yesterday with the sergeant. We feared the worst. Your father and Mr. Caro have been frantic. He helped her down, his hands solicitous, treating her like porcelain. You must be exhausted, he said. Come, my wife has prepared a room. Hot water, clean clothes. You are safe now, my dear. You are back among civilized folk. Kate looked over her shoulder. Tahan was still on his horse. A stable boy was reaching for the reins, looking at the scout with open fear. Tahan sat there, alone in the crowd of blue coats. He looked at her. His face was a fortress. Go, Miss Hayes, he said quietly. Kate wanted to say something. She wanted to yell at the corporal. She wanted to tell the captain that this man was the only reason she was breathing. But the social weight of the fort pressed down on her, silencing her. She let the captain lead her away. An hour later, Kate stared at herself in a mirror in the captain's quarters. She was clean. The dust of the trail had been scrubbed from her skin. Her hair was pinned up. She wore a borrowed dress of pale yellow muslin that smelled of lavender water. She looked like a lady. She looked like Catherine Hayes, the rancher's daughter, the future wife of Edwin Caro. She hated it. She felt hollow. The dress felt like a costume. The walls of the room felt too close. She missed the smell of sage. She missed the silence. She walked to the window and looked out at the parade ground. She saw a group of soldiers smoking near the stables. They were laughing. Savages are all the same. One was saying, even the tame ones. Did you see him eyeing her? I bet he tried something. No way, another said. Tahan knows if he touches a white woman, we string him up. He is a dog, but he is an obedient dog. Kate turned away from the window, her stomach churning with nausea. They knew nothing. They knew nothing of the fire in the cave, the respect in his hands, the grief in his voice. They saw a dog. She had seen a man. A commotion outside drew her back to the window. A cloud of dust at the gate. A rider galloping in on a foaming horse. Kate's heart stopped. It was Edwin. He swung down from his horse before it had even stopped moving. He looked frantic, his face red, his clothes dusty. He stormed toward the captain, who was standing on the porch. Where is she? Edwin roared. Where is Catherine? She is inside. Mr. Caro, the captain said soothingly. She is safe. Edwin pushed past him and burst into the room. Kate stood frozen by the window. Edwin stopped. He looked at her, his eyes wild. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her. Kate, he shouted. He pulled her into a crush of an embrace. It was not a hug of relief. It was a hug of possession. He squeezed her so hard her ribs ached. He smelled of sweat and whiskey and anger. I thought you were dead, he muttered into her hair. I thought those animals had taken you. He pulled back, holding her by the shoulders. His grip was bruising. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? I am fine. Edwin, Kate said, trying to pull away. I am unhurt. He scanned her face, looking for marks. Then his eyes hardened. The captain said you came in with the scout. With that? Indian. Tahan. Kate said. His name is Tahan. Edwin sneered. I don't care what his name is. You were alone with him? For 2 days? Out there. He saved my life. Edwin, Kate said, her voice shaking. He fought off the outlaws. He guided me through the storm. Edwin released her, pacing the room. He ran a hand through his hair. It is not right, he muttered. A white woman alone with a Comanche. People will talk. Kate, they will talk. Is that what you care about? Kate asked, a spark of anger igniting in her chest. That people will talk. I'm alive. Edwin, of course I'm glad you are alive, he snapped, but reputation matters. Kate, my reputation, your reputation. You are to be my wife. I cannot have men whispering that you were compromised. He looked at her with a sudden, dark suspicion. He didn't try anything. Kate felt cold. She remembered Tahan's hands hovering over her laces, asking, "Are you sure?" She remembered Edwin in the barn, his wet mouth, his grasping hands. He was a gentleman. "Edwin," she said coldly, "which is more than I can say for some." Edwin's face flushed a dark red. He stepped close to her, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Watch your tongue. Kate, you are upset. You have been through an ordeal. We will forget this happened. We will go to town tomorrow, and we will get married, and we will put this ugliness behind us." He reached out and stroked her cheek. His thumb felt rough. "You belong to me, Kate, remember that." He turned and walked out. Kate stood there, trembling, but it was not fear this time. It was rage. Later that evening, before the sun set, Kate slipped out of the officers' quarters. She told the guard she needed air. She went to the stables. Most of the soldiers were in the mess hall. The yard was quiet. She found Tahan near the corral. He was grooming his paint horse. He had removed the army coat and was wearing his buckskin shirt. He looked solitary, cut off from the warmth of the barracks lights. He stopped brushing the horse when he heard her footsteps. He turned. "Miss Hayes, he said you should not be here." Kate stopped a few feet from him. She looked at him, the high cheekbones, the dark eyes, the scar. "I wanted to, thank you," she said, "properly, before we leave." Tahan looked at the house where Edwin was. "He is angry," Tahan said calmly. "He is a fool." Kate said. Tahan's lips quirked in a ghost of a smile. "He is a powerful fool. Miss Hayes, dangerous." Kate took a step closer. "They are saying terrible things about you," she said. "The soldiers, Edwin, they say—" "Do not tell me what they say," Tahan interrupted gently. "I know what they say. I have heard it all my life." He turned back to the horse, stroking its neck. "You are safe now. Miss Hayes, you will go to town. You will marry the cattleman. You will have a big house and children who do not know what it is to be hungry. Is that what you think I want?" Kate asked. Tahan paused. He looked at her over the horse's back. "It is what you must have. The world does not give us what we want. It gives us what we can survive." Kate felt a lump in her throat. "Tahan," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the title, directly to his face. The sound of it hung in the air, intimate and defiant. He went very still. He looked at her, and for a moment, the mask slipped entirely. She saw a depth of loneliness in his eyes that matched her own. She saw a man who wanted, just as she did, but who had learned that wanting was a weakness. "You survived, Catherine," he said softly, using her name in return. "That is enough." He turned away, picking up the brush. "Go back to the captain's house, before they see you." Kate stood there for a moment longer, watching his hands move over the horse's flank. Gentle, capable hands that had saved her life and respected her soul. "Goodbye, Tahan," she whispered. She turned and walked back toward the lights of the fort, leaving the only honest thing she knew in the darkness. The wagon ride from Fort Concho to the town of Split Rock took the better part of a day, a journey measured in the creak of leather harness and the grinding of iron-rimmed wheels against hard-packed ruts. Edwin Caro drove the team with a heavy hand, using the whip more often than was necessary, sending cracks of sound echoing across the open scrub. Kate sat beside him, her spine rigid against the wooden seat back. She wore the blue silk dress Edwin had sent, the fabric feeling alien and slippery against her skin. It was too fine for the road, too tight in the ribs, a garment designed for a parlor, not a wagon seat exposed to the relentless Texas wind. Split Rock appeared on the horizon like a scar on the land. It was a town born of the cattle trade, a collection of raw lumber and false hopes huddled together against the vastness of the plains. As they rolled down the main thoroughfare, the noise washed over Kate, a chaotic symphony of shouting men, lowing cattle, and the tinny, frantic sound of a piano spilling from the open doors of a saloon. The town was ugly. There was no other word for it. The buildings were slapped together, their false fronts looming precariously over muddy wooden sidewalks. The air smelled of manure, coal smoke, and stale beer. Everywhere Kate looked, She saw fences, corrals boxed in the livestock, railings hemmed in the sidewalks, walls cut off the view of the horizon. After the terrifying, exhilarating openness of the canyonlands with Tahan, the town felt like a cage. Edwin pulled the wagon up in front of the Drover's Rest, a boarding house that leaned slightly to the left. He set the brake with a hard jerk of his arm. "We are here," he announced, "climbing down." He did not offer a hand immediately. He stood looking at the town, a proprietorial gleam in his eyes. "It is rough now," he said, raising his voice over the din of a passing freight wagon. "But the railroad is coming next year. This land will triple in value. We will be kings here. Catherine." He turned then, reaching up to help her down. His hands were large and hot. When her boots hit the boardwalk, he did not release her waist immediately. He held her there, displaying her to the street like a prize heifer he had just won at auction. "Smile. Kate," he murmured, his fingers digging into her side. "You look like you are going to a funeral." Kate forced her lips to curve. "I am tired. Edwin." The journey was long. Edwin guided her inside. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Gable, a woman with eyes like dried currants who looked Kate up and down with critical assessment. "Mr. Caro has arranged the best room," Mrs. Gable said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It faces the street. $2 a week, meals included." Edwin paid the woman, peeling bills from a thick roll he kept in his vest pocket. He made sure Mrs. Gable saw the size of the roll. "My fiancée will need to rest," Edwin said, "and she will need a seamstress. The wedding is in 3 days." Kate felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. 3 days. That evening, Edwin took her to dinner at the hotel dining room, the only establishment in town that boasted a tablecloth. He ordered for her without asking what she wanted: roast beef, rare, and potatoes. As they ate, Edwin talked. He did not converse. He declaimed. He spoke of the merger of their father's herds, of the debts he had paid off at the general store, of the fence line he intended to push further west, cutting off the open range. "Your father was a fool to let those cattle wander," Edwin said, slicing his meat with savage precision. "Open range is dead. A man needs to lock down what is his." A young waitress approached their table to refill Edwin's coffee. She was tired, her hair escaping her cap, and her hand shook slightly as she poured. A few drops of dark liquid splashed onto the white tablecloth near Edwin's elbow. Edwin's reaction was instantaneous. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "Watch what you are doing, girl," he barked. The waitress flinched, backing away. "I'm sorry, sir. I will fetch a rag." "You will fetch the manager," Edwin snapped. "You are incompetent." "Edwin, please," Kate said, her voice low. "It is just a drop." "She is tired." Edwin turned his glare on Kate. His eyes were hard, devoid of the charm he wore when he was courting. "Do not excuse her. Kate, sloth should not be tolerated. If you let people be sloppy with the small things, they will ruin the big things. You will learn that when you run my house." He looked back at the terrified girl. "Go! Get out of my sight!" As the girl fled, Kate looked at Edwin's hands. They were clenched into fists on the table. She remembered Tahan's hands, how they had held the reins of her horse in the river, firm but saving, how they had unlaced her dress, trembling with the effort of not touching her. Tahan, who had killed men, had shown more gentleness to a shivering woman than Edwin showed to a girl who spilled coffee. Later, walking her back to the boarding house, the street dark save for the pools of yellow light from the saloon windows, Edwin stopped in the shadows of an alleyway. He turned Kate toward him, backing her against the rough wood of a building. "You were quiet tonight," he said. "I have a headache." Kate lied. Edwin stepped closer, pressing his body against hers. The smell of him was overpowering. Bay rum, tobacco, and the roast beef. "You are cold." "Kate," he whispered, his face close to hers. "I do not like cold women. I paid a high price for you. Your father's debt was not small." He gripped her upper arms, his thumbs pressed into the tender flesh, searching for a reaction. "I expect gratitude," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "And I expect obedience." When we are married, you will not undermine me in front of servants. Do you understand?" Kate looked up at him. She saw the glint of his teeth in the shadows. She felt the trap snapping shut, tighter than any corset. "I understand. Edwin," she said, her voice flat. He stared at her for a moment longer, then leaned in and kissed her. It was a hard, wet kiss, a claiming. He ground his lips against hers, his tongue pushing into her mouth. Kate stood paralyzed, her eyes wide open, staring at the wood grain of the building behind him, enduring him. When he pulled back, he looked satisfied. "Good," he said. "You will learn." 2 days later, the atmosphere in Split Rock shifted. It began with the barking of dogs. Kate was in her room, trying to read the book of Tennyson she had brought, but the words swam on the page. She heard the commotion and went to the window. A patrol of soldiers was riding down the main street. They looked weary, their uniforms dusted with the gray powder of the trail. And there, riding at the flank of the lieutenant, was Tahan. He looked exactly as he had on the plains, and yet entirely different. Out there, he had been part of the landscape, a king in his own element. Here, framed by the false fronts and the staring crowds, he looked isolated. He rode his paint horse with his back straight, his eyes fixed on the ears of his mount. He did not look left or right. The townspeople had come out of the shops. A silence fell over the street, a heavy, sullen silence. "Look at him." A woman standing below Kate's window hissed to her neighbor. "Riding in here like he owns the place. Filthy savage," a man muttered. As Tahan passed the saloon, a ranch hand stepped off the boardwalk and spat a stream of brown tobacco juice at the hooves of the paint horse. "Go back to the reservation. Dog!" the man shouted. Tahan did not flinch. He did not look at the man. He simply kept riding, his face a mask of stone. But Kate, watching from the second floor, saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way his hand rested near the knife at his belt, not threatening, but ready. He brought news. The word spread through the town within the hour. The soldiers were reporting fresh troubles to the north. Cattle were missing from the Circle Bar range. A few homesteads had reported tools stolen. The bands that had refused the reservation were starving, desperate, and moving closer to the settlements. Kate felt a desperate need to speak to him. She told herself it was just to thank him again, to ensure he was safe. But in her heart, she knew it was because the air in Split Rock was choking her, and he was the only window left open. She found her chance late that afternoon. Edwin was in a meeting with the banker, discussing land deeds. Kate told Mrs. Gable she was going to the mercantile for ribbon. Instead, she slipped down the alley and made her way to the livery stable at the edge of town. The stable was dim and smelled of sweet hay and manure. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light falling through the cracks in the roof. Tahan was there. He was in a stall at the far end, currying his horse. He had taken off his blue coat and hung it on a nail. Kate walked softly, but he turned before she was within 10 feet of him. He did not look surprised. "Miss Hayes," he said. Kate stopped. Seeing him here, in the shadows, brought a sudden rush of memory. The canyon, the fire, the river. "I saw you ride in," she said. "The people. They were cruel." Tahan turned back to the horse, running the brush in long, rhythmic strokes. "They are afraid," he said. "Fear makes men ugly." "Are you safe here?" she asked, stepping closer. Tahan paused. He looked at her over his shoulder. "I am safe nowhere. Miss Hayes, on the plains, the soldiers watch me to see if I will turn traitor. In the town, the people watch me to see if I will steal, among my own people. Many call me a ghost because I wear the blue coat." He turned to face her, leaning back against the stall door. "Why did you come here? If Caro sees you—" "He is busy," Kate said quickly. I felt I had to see a face that did not look at me as if I were a piece of property." Tahan's eyes softened. He looked at her blue silk dress, at the way her hair was pinned up tight. "You look like a town lady now," he said. "I feel like a doll," she whispered. "A doll in a box." Tahan reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he pulled it back. "The box is strong. Catherine," he said, using her name again. "But you are stronger. You survived the storm." Before she could answer, the stable door creaked open. A burst of sunlight flooded the aisle. A ranch hand, the same one who had spilled the coffee on Edwin's table, a man named Miller, walked in, carrying a saddle. He stopped when he saw them. He looked at Tahan, then at Kate, standing close together in the shadows of the stall. His eyes widened, and a slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. "Well now," Miller said, "ain't this cozy?" Kate stepped back quickly, her heart hammering. "I was just inquiring about a horse," she stammered. Miller chuckled. He threw his saddle onto a rail. "Sure you were, Miss Hayes. Sure you were. Does Mr. Caro know you are shopping for horse flesh with the scout?" Kate felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Tahan. His face had gone hard, his eyes fixing Miller with a look that could have stripped paint. "Leave her be," Tahan said low. Miller held up his hands, laughing. "I ain't saying a word. Chief, just interesting company you keep. Miss Hayes." Kate fled. She gathered her skirts and ran out of the stable, into the blinding afternoon sun, feeling Miller's laughter following her like a stain. The violence, when it came, was sudden and brutal. It happened that night. A ranch 5 miles east of town, the Potter place, was hit. Kate heard the shouting from the street before dawn. She dressed hurriedly and went to the window. Men were gathering below, carrying lanterns and rifles. The air was thick with tension. She went downstairs. The lobby of the boarding house was buzzing. Edwin was there, dressed in his riding coat, a pistol strapped to his hip. He was talking to the sheriff and the army captain. "They took 40 head, the sheriff was saying, and they killed Potter's foreman. Shot him in the back while he was checking the gate." "Indians," Edwin said. "It has to be." The captain looked uneasy. "We found tracks, Mr. Caro, but they were mixed, shod horses and unshod ponies. It could be outlaws trying to lay blame." Edwin slammed his fist into his palm. "It is Comanches. Captain, do not be soft. They are hungry, and they are raiding. We need to ride out and put an end to it before they hit the town." He looked up and saw Kate standing on the stairs. His face hardened. "Go back to your room. Kate, this is men's business. I want to know what happened," she said, coming down the last few steps. "There has been a murder," Edwin said bluntly. "Savages. We are raising a posse." The sheriff turned to the captain. "We need a tracker. Captain, we cannot find them in the rocks without one." The captain sighed. "I will get Tahan." Edwin narrowed his eyes. "Tahan, the same scout who brought my fiancée in?" "The same," the captain said. Edwin smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "Good. Let him lead us. And if he leads us in circles to protect his kin, well, we will know where his loyalties lie." An hour later, the posse was assembled in the street. 20 men, heavily armed. Tahan sat on his paint horse at the front, looking small against the wall of hostile faces. The sheriff rode up to him. "You find them. Tahan," the sheriff warned. "You find them, and you do not lose the trail. If you play games with us, I will let Caro here have his way with you." Tahan looked at the sheriff, then at Edwin, who was sitting high on a black stallion, his hand resting on his pistol. "I will find the tracks," Tahan said. Kate watched from the boardwalk. She caught Tahan's eye for a fleeting second. He looked tired. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Edwin rode over to where Kate stood. He leaned down from his saddle. "I am doing this for us," he said, "to make this land safe for our children." He did not wait for her reply. He spurred his horse, and the posse thundered out of town, leaving a cloud of dust that tasted of vengeance. That night, Kate sat by her window. She could not sleep. The town was quiet, but it was a waiting quiet. She thought of Edwin's kiss, the taste of whiskey, the demand of it. And then she thought of the canyon. She closed her eyes and remembered the sensation of the cold air on her back, the warmth of the fire, and Tahan's voice. "Are you sure?" he had asked. Edwin never asked. Edwin took, she realized, with a clarity that terrified her, that she was marrying a monster to escape a hard life. only to find that the monster made the life harder than poverty ever could. Out on the plains, the wind was blowing. The posse rode hard. The tracks were easy to follow. Too easy, Tahan thought. A herd of cattle left a wide trail. They rode through the morning and into the heat of the afternoon. The land changed from the flat scrub to the broken ravines near the river. Tahan rode at the front, his eyes on the ground. He saw things the white men missed. He saw that the cattle were being driven fast, whipped hard. He saw the tracks of the riders. There were 4 riders driving the herd. Shod horses, white men's boots. But there were other tracks, crossing the trail. Unshod ponies, travois poles dragging in the dust. A family group, moving slow, starving. The 2 trails intersected near the river crossing. Tahan slowed his horse. "What is it?" Edwin shouted, riding up beside him. "Have we lost them?" Tahan pointed to the ground. 2 groups, he said. The cattle went west. A Comanche band went south, toward the water. Edwin looked at the ground, seeing only dust. "They are together," he snapped. "The band is driving the cattle." "No, Tahan said. "The cattle tracks are fresh. The travois tracks are a day old. They are not together." "You are lying," Edwin spat. "You are trying to lead us away from the beef. I am telling you what the ground says," Tahan said calmly. The sheriff rode up. "What is the dispute?" "He says they split up." Edwin said, "I say we follow the Indians. If they have the beef, we kill them. If they do not, they probably ate it already." The sheriff looked at Tahan, then at the sky. "We checked the river," he decided. "It is closer." Tahan's jaw tightened. He turned his horse south. They topped the rise overlooking the river 10 minutes later. The scene below was a horror. The small Comanche band, perhaps 10 people, was scattered along the riverbank. They had not been driving cattle. They had been butchering one. A stray cow, likely lost from the herd the outlaws were driving, had wandered into their path. They had killed it and were trying to strip the meat, but someone had found them first. The bodies were strewn across the sand. Women, 2 old men, children. They had been shot from a distance, likely from the ridge the posse now occupied. "Jesus," one of the deputies whispered. Edwin stared down at the scene. He did not look horrified. He looked vindicated. "See," he said, pointing. "They have a cow. Thieves. They are dead." "Edwin," Tahan said, his voice trembling with a rage he could barely suppress. Edwin shrugged. "Justice. Looks like someone beat us to it." Tahan kicked his horse into a gallop, sliding down the ridge. He hit the sand and leaped off his horse while it was still moving. He ran to the body of a woman lying near the water. She was face down. He turned her over. He knew her. It was not a close kin, but a woman from the Antelope Eater band. He had shared a fire with her family 2 winters ago. Her name was Little Bird. She had a bullet hole in her back. Beside her lay a child, no more than 6. Tahan fell to his knees. A sound torn from the bottom of his soul threatened to erupt, but he swallowed it, turning it into a bile that burned his throat. The posse rode down to join him. Edwin dismounted and walked over to the carcass of the cow. "My brand," he announced. "Circle C." "Well, that settles it." He walked over to where Tahan knelt. He looked down at the dead woman. "Good riddance," Edwin said. "One less breeder." Tahan stood up. He moved so fast Edwin flinched. Tahan stood chest to chest with the cattleman, his hand gripping the hilt of his knife so hard his knuckles cracked. "Do not speak," Tahan whispered. Edwin recovered his composure. He sneered. "Are you going to cut me? Scout? In front of the sheriff? Go ahead. Give us a reason." One of the younger men in the posse, a hothead named Billy, jumped down from his horse. He pulled a Bowie knife from his belt. "We should take proof back," he said, eyeing the long black hair of the dead woman. "The town will want to see we got the thieves. There's a bounty on scalps in the next county." He stepped toward the body. "No!" The roar came from Tahan. He stepped between Billy and the body. He drew his Winchester from the scabbard on his back and leveled it at the boy's chest. "You will not touch them," Tahan said. The click of the lever action echoed in the silence. The entire posse froze. 20 guns shifted, hands hovering over holsters. Drop the rifle. Tahan! The sheriff shouted, drawing his own pistol. You will not mutilate them, Tahan repeated. They are dead. They paid for your cow with their blood. Leave them be. Edwin laughed. He stepped back, his hand on his revolver. Look at him. Sheriff, protecting his own. I told you he was a traitor. Sheriff, Tahan said, his eyes never leaving Billy's face. This woman has no weapon. The child has no weapon. They were starving. If you let this boy cut her hair, you are not men. You are vultures. The sheriff looked at the bodies. He looked at the tense line of Tahan's shoulders. He looked at the sun beating down on the slaughter. Even in the harsh code of the West, there was a line. Put the knife away. Billy, the sheriff grunted. But sheriff, Billy protested. I said put it away. We are not savages. We got the cow. They are dead. It is done. Billy spat on the ground and sheathed his knife. Edwin looked furious. He glared at Tahan. You made a mistake, boy, Edwin hissed. You pointed a gun at a white man. You think we will forget this? Tahan lowered the rifle slowly. He looked at the dead woman one last time. He wanted to bury her. He wanted to sing the death song, but he knew if he stayed, they would kill him. He mounted his horse. He felt as dead as the woman on the sand. We go back, he said hollowly. The ride back to Split Rock was a funeral procession, but the corpse was the truth. By the time they reached the town limits, the story had changed. It twisted in the mouths of the men, shaped by their prejudice and their need to be heroes. They did not say they found a starving family butchering a stray cow. As they rode down Main Street, men shouted the news to the gathering crowd. We got them, Edwin shouted, waving his hat. A war party. They were down by the river, preparing to attack the town. The crowd cheered. They had a cow, Billy yelled. And they were painting up for war. It was a lie, a bald, bloody lie. Kate stood on the boardwalk as the posse dismounted. She saw Tahan. He sat on his horse at the back of the group. He looked broken. The sheriff was answering questions. Did Tahan help? Someone asked. Edwin stepped in before the sheriff could speak. Help! He nearly got us killed. He hesitated. He tried to stop us from engaging. He pointed a rifle at Billy Wilson when Billy tried to check the bodies for weapons. A gasp went through the crowd. Traitor! Someone shouted. Kate felt the world tilting. She pushed through the crowd. She stepped out into the muddy street, her blue silk dress bright against the dust. Is that true? She demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd quieted, turning to look at her. Edwin's fiancée. Edwin walked over to her, a tight smile on his face. Kate, go inside. Did you see them attack? Kate asked, looking at the sheriff. Did anyone see them fire a shot? The sheriff looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight. Well, Miss Hayes. They were armed, and they had the beef. But did they attack? Kate pressed. Or were they just families? Edwin grabbed her arm. His fingers bruised her skin. Stop it, he hissed. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of the truth, Kate cried, pulling away. She looked at Tahan. Tahan, tell them! Tahan looked at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but he also saw the mood of the crowd. He saw the ropes hanging from the saddles. He saw the hate. If he spoke, if she defended him too loudly, they would turn on her too. He stayed silent. See, Edwin shouted. He has nothing to say. He is ashamed. Edwin turned to the crowd. This man is a danger to us all. He eats our bread and protects those who steal it. Hang him, a voice shouted from the back. The sheriff held up a hand. Now, hold on. We have no proof he killed anyone, but he did threaten a member of the posse. Lock him up, Edwin said. Until we decide what to do. The sheriff nodded. He walked over to Tahan. Get down. Son, give me the rifle. Tahan surrendered the weapon. He dismounted. 2 deputies grabbed his arms. Kate watched as they dragged him toward the small wooden jailhouse. She saw the crowd parting, spitting at him as he passed. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Gable. Come away, dear, the landlady said, her voice cold. You do not want to be seen weeping for an Indian. It does not look right. Kate looked around the circle of faces. She saw the women whispering behind their hands. She saw the men looking at her with speculation. She traveled with him. The whispers said, alone, for 2 days. And now she defends him. She is tainted. Kate looked at Edwin. He was accepting a drink from a flask offered by the banker, looking like a conquering hero. She realized then that the walls of the town were not just fences. They were built of lies, and she was trapped inside them. She turned and walked back to the boarding house, her head high, but her heart was in the jail cell with the man who had met her eyes only when she was truly sure. The poison in Split Rock did not travel by wind or water. It traveled by whisper. In the 24 hours following the return of the posse, the town of Split Rock transformed from a bustling cattle hub into a closed circle of judgment. The story of the massacre at the river had been twisted, stretched, and reshaped until it fit the prejudices of the people who lived there. The starving family became a war party. The stolen cow became a herd. And the scout who had tried to stop the mutilation became a traitor. But the malice did not stop with Tahan. It seeped into the boarding house, curled under the door of the parlor, and settled like dust on Kate Hayes. The rumor started nowhere and everywhere at once. It was spoken behind hands in the mercantile. It was muttered over beer mugs in the saloon. She was alone with him. The voices said, 2 nights, in the canyon. They say they shared a blanket. They say she rides like a man now. They say she is tainted. Kate felt the change in the air when she walked down the stairs for breakfast. Mrs. Gable did not offer her the usual morning greeting. Instead, the landlady turned her back, scrubbing a pot with unnecessary violence, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Good morning, Mrs. Gable, Kate said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Mrs. Gable did not turn. There is coffee on the stove, the woman said to the wall. The bread is day old, fresh as for paying guests who do not bring shame to this house. Kate froze. The insult was sharp and direct. She walked to the table, pouring a cup of black coffee. Her hands shook, and the china rattled against the saucer. I have done nothing wrong, Mrs. Gable, Kate said quietly. Mrs. Gable spun around, her face flushed with self-righteous indignation. People are talking. Miss Hayes, decent people. They say you sided with that savage against your own betrothed. They say you looked at that Indian with eyes that no Christian woman should have. She wiped her hands on her apron as if Kate's presence had soiled them. Mister, Caro is a good man, a wealthy man. You should be on your knees thanking God he has not thrown you into the street. If it were my house, and not his money paying for the room, you would be out there already. Kate set the cup down. She felt a cold anger rising in her chest, displacing the shame. He saved my life, Kate said. Does that count for nothing? It counts for nothing if he took your virtue doing it. Mrs. Gable snapped. The front door opened with a crash. Edwin Caro stood in the frame. He looked as if he had not slept. His eyes were rimmed with red. His coat was wrinkled, and the smell of stale whiskey rolled off him in waves. He looked at Mrs. Gable, then at Kate. Leave us, he commanded. Mrs. Gable scurried into the kitchen, closing the door with a decisive click. Kate stood by the table. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Edwin, she began. Do not speak, he hissed. He walked toward her. He moved with the heavy, uneven gait of a man who is drunk on both alcohol and rage. He stopped 2 feet from her, breathing heavily. Do you know what I heard at the barbershop this morning? Edwin asked. His voice was dangerously soft. Kate remained silent, staring at the knot in his cravat. I heard a man who owes me money, laughing. He was making a joke. He asked if I was going to wash you with lye soap before the wedding. To get the smell of the Indian off you? Edwin's face twisted. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. It was the same grip he had used in the alley, but harder now. Cruel! What did you do? He shouted, shaking her. I did nothing, Kate cried, trying to pull away. Do not lie to me. You were out there with him. You defended him in the street. You looked at him like he was a man, not a dog. Did he touch you? Did you let him? No, Kate screamed. He was a gentleman. He treated me with respect. The word respect seemed to snap something inside Edwin. Respect, he roared. A savage does not know respect. And you? "You are mine!" He struck her. It was not a fist, but an open hand, swung with the full weight of his shoulder. The slap connected with Kate's cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. The force of the blow threw her sideways. She collided with the wall, her shoulder hitting the plaster hard. She slid down, gasping, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. The room spun. Her ear rang with a high, piercing whine. For a moment, there was no sound but Edwin's ragged breathing. Kate tasted copper in her mouth. She looked up at him. She expected to see regret. She saw only possession. Edwin stood over her, his chest heaving. "You belong to me." "Catherine," he said, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "I bought your father's debt. I bought the clothes on your back. I own the house you will live in, and I own the bed you will sleep in. You will not humiliate me. You will not look at another man. You will learn to obey." Kate stared at him. The shock of the blow was fading, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. She remembered the barn dance. She remembered the fear of being small and helpless against a man's strength. But beneath the fear, beneath the throbbing pain in her cheek, something else ignited. It was the memory of the canyon. It was the memory of her own voice saying, "I am sure." She slowly pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees were weak, but she forced them to lock. She stood, swaying slightly, and looked Edwin in the eye. She did not cry. She did not beg. "You can buy the debt, Edwin," she whispered, her voice like broken glass. "You can buy the land, but you cannot buy me. You never could." Edwin stepped back, unsettled by the lack of tears. He straightened his coat, regaining his composure. "We will see," he muttered. "The wedding is tomorrow. You will stay in this room until then. If you leave, I will have the sheriff drag you back." He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Kate stood in the silence of the parlor. She touched her cheek. It was hot and swelling. But inside, the cold knot of dread had burned away. In its place was a fire fueled by injustice. The night brought the wind, and the wind brought the fire. It happened 3 hours after sundown. Kate was sitting in the dark of her room, listening to the gusts rattle the window pane, when a shout rose from the street. "Fire! Fire at the Mercantile!" She ran to the window. To the south, orange light flickered against the low clouds. Sparks swirled into the black sky like angry hornets. The town mobilized with chaotic speed. Men ran with buckets. The clang of the fire bell hammered against the wind. Kate watched, her heart pounding. The Mercantile storehouse. It was where the winter supplies were kept: flour, grain, tools. By the time the sun rose, the storehouse was a smoldering ruin of black timber and ash. The loss was significant. But in Split Rock, disaster always required a villain. The sheriff found hoofprints leading away from the back of the burned building. They headed north, toward the open country. By noon, the narrative had been constructed. It was Tahan. A man in the saloon declared, "I saw him riding near there yesterday evening. He was casing it. He did it to avenge those thieves we shot at the river." Another shouted, "He is signaling his people. He burned the food so we would starve just like them." It did not matter that Tahan had been in the livery stable. It did not matter that the hoofprints could have belonged to anyone. The town was angry, scared, and looking for blood. The sheriff, pressured by the mayor and a furious Edwin Caro, who had lost a shipment of wire in the blaze, rode out to the livery stable. They found Tahan sleeping in the loft. He offered no resistance. They dragged him out into the sunlight. Kate heard the noise from her room. It was a low, ugly roar, like the sound of a river in flood. She went to the balcony. Below, on the muddy main street, a procession was moving toward the jail. Tahan was in the center. His hands were bound behind his back with a rough hemp rope. A deputy held the other end, jerking him forward if he stumbled. He had been beaten. Kate could see a fresh cut above his eye, bleeding into his eyebrow. His shirt was torn. The crowd lined the boardwalks. "Traitor!" a woman screamed. "Burn him like he burned our flour!" A man stepped off the curb and threw a handful of horse manure. It struck Tahan on the chest, staining the buckskin. Tahan did not flinch. He walked with his head up, looking at the horizon at the end of the street. ignoring the hatred that foamed around him. Then, a rotten cabbage, thrown by a boy no older than 10, hit him in the shoulder. The crowd laughed. Kate gripped the railing of the balcony until her knuckles turned white. She felt a wave of nausea. These were the civilized people? These were the Christians? They looked like demons. She saw Tahan stumble as the deputy yanked the rope. For a second, he looked up. His eyes swept the buildings. He saw her. He stood there for a heartbeat, mud on his chest, blood on his face, surrounded by a mob that wanted him dead. And in his eyes, she saw no plea for help. She saw only a profound, weary sadness. Kate turned from the railing. She ran through the room, grabbing her shawl. "Miss Hayes! Mrs.!" Gable shouted as Kate reached the bottom of the stairs. "Mr. Caro said you are to stay inside." "Get out of my way," Kate said. She pushed past the landlady and burst out onto the street. The procession had reached the jailhouse. The sheriff was unlocking the door. Edwin stood on the steps, his arms crossed, looking satisfied. Kate ran. Her boots splashed in the mud. She pushed through the crowd of men who smelled of sweat and hate. "Stop!" she screamed. The crowd turned. The sheriff paused, the key in the lock. Kate broke through the circle and stood between the mob and Tahan. She was breathless, her hair coming loose from its pins, the red mark of Edwin's hand still faintly visible on her cheek. "He did not do it!" she shouted, her voice ringing off the false fronts. A silence fell over the crowd. Edwin stepped down from the porch. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Get back inside, Catherine. He was with the soldiers," Kate said, turning to the crowd. "When the raid happened years ago, he was with the army, and yesterday he was in the stable. I saw him." A titter of laughter ran through the crowd. "You saw him, did you?" a man called out. "Was that before or after you shared his blanket?" The crowd roared with laughter. Kate's face burned, but she did not step back. "He saved my life," she cried. "He is a better man than any of you. He stopped you from mutilating dead women. He is the only one here with any honor." Edwin moved fast. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the bruise he had made the night before. "That is enough," he shouted. He dragged her back, away from Tahan. "You are shaming yourself," Edwin hissed in her ear. "You are speaking for your lover in front of the whole town. He is not my lover." Kate screamed, struggling against him. "He is a human being." Edwin clamped a hand over her mouth. He looked at the crowd, his face red with humiliation. "She is hysterical," he announced. "The ordeal has unhinged her mind." He dragged her backward, toward the boarding house. Kate kicked and clawed, but he was too strong. As she was hauled away, she looked back. The sheriff shoved Tahan into the dark cell. The heavy door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking home echoed like a gunshot. Tahan was gone, and the town cheered. Night fell over Split Rock like a shroud. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. Edwin had locked Kate in her room. He had nailed a board across the window frame from the outside and taken the key to the door. "You will stay there until the wedding," he had said through the wood, "and if you make a sound, I will gag you." But Edwin had forgotten the service stairs at the back of the hallway, the ones the maids used to carry coal. The door was bolted from the hall side, but the hinges were loose. Kate waited until the house was silent. It was 2 in the morning. She used the metal handle of her hairbrush to work the pin out of the bottom hinge. It took an hour of agonizing, silent work. When the pin slid out, she was able to pry the bottom of the door open just enough to squeeze through. She moved like a ghost through the back hallways. She slipped out the kitchen door into the alley. The town was asleep, or pretending to be. The saloon was closed, though a faint light still burned in the back. Kate pulled her dark shawl over her head and made her way to the jail. It was a small, crudely built structure of logs, sitting apart from the main street. There was no guard outside. The sheriff assumed the thick timbers were enough. Kate crept to the side of the building, where a small, barred window looked into the cell. "Tahan?" she whispered. There was a rustle of straw. A shadow moved in the darkness. "Catherine?" His voice was rough, dry. Kate pressed her face to the bars. She could smell the damp earth of the floor and the metallic tang of blood. "I am here," she said. Tahan's face appeared in the slice of moonlight that fell through the bars. He looked terrible. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split. "You should not be here," he said. "If Caro finds you—" "I do not care about Caro," Kate said fiercely. "I do not care about any of them." She reached through the bars. Tahan hesitated, then stepped closer. He lifted his hand, the hand with the scarred knuckles, and touched her fingers. His skin was cold. "They are going to kill you." "Tahan," she whispered, the tears finally spilling over. "I know," he said simply. "They say you burned the storehouse. They say you are a spy. They say what they need to say to sleep at night." Tahan said, "It does not matter what is true. It only matters what they fear. I am so sorry." Kate sobbed. "I tried to tell them. I tried." "Hush," Tahan said. He curled his fingers around hers. His grip was weak, but gentle. "You stood for me. No one has ever done that, not in this world." Kate pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars. It feels like the barn," she confessed, her voice trembling. "The town, Edwin. It feels like I am trapped in that corner again, and no one is listening." Tahan was silent for a moment. "I know the corner," he said softly. "I was in the corner when the soldiers came to the village. The fog was thick. I heard the shots. I ran to the lodge. Nuna was holding our son. She was trying to hide under a buffalo robe." His voice broke, a jagged sound in the dark. "I saw the soldier aim. I shouted. I tried to run to them, but the bullet was faster." He gripped Kate's hand tighter, his thumb stroking her palm. "I survived because I was too slow. Catherine, I wear the blue coat to punish myself. I breathe the air of injustice because I do not deserve the clean air." Kate looked at him. She saw the wound in his soul, deep and festering, and she saw her own wound reflected in it. "We are both ghosts," she whispered. "Maybe," Tahan said, "but even ghosts can feel warmth." He squeezed her hand. "Go, Catherine. Go back to your life. Survive. That is the only victory we get." Kate looked at their joined hands, the white skin and the copper skin, united by the iron bars. She felt a surge of emotion that was not fear, not grief, but something brighter and more dangerous. It was love, not the sweet, easy love of storybooks, but a love forged in fire and blood. "I will not leave you," she said. She pulled her hand away. "Wait for me, Catherine. No, wait for me. Tahan." She turned and ran into the darkness. Kate did not go back to the boarding house. She went to the back of the saloon. She knew the layout. The sheriff usually slept at home, but he left a deputy on watch. Tonight, the deputy was a man named Stumpy, an older man with a penchant for corn whiskey. She peered through the dusty window. Stumpy was sitting at a small table near the jailhouse keys, which hung on a nail by the door. He was slumped over, snoring, a half-empty bottle in front of him. But he wasn't alone in the room. A second man, Miller, the ranch hand, was sleeping on a cot in the corner. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved to the door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open, inch by inch. The hinges groaned. Stumpy snorted, shifted, and settled back into his stupor. Kate slipped inside. The air smelled of sour mash and sweat. She crept toward the wall. Every board in the floor seemed to scream under her weight. She kept her eyes on Miller. He turned over, muttering in his sleep, his hand twitching near his holster. Kate reached the wall. The keys were cold metal rings. She lifted them slowly. They clinked together, a tiny sound, but in the silence, it sounded like a church bell. Stumpy's head jerked up. "Huh? Was that?" Kate froze in the shadows. Stumpy blinked blearily, looking around the room. His eyes were glazed. He grunted, scratched his beard, and laid his head back down on the table. Kate let out a breath she had held for a lifetime. She backed out of the room, clutching the keys to her chest. She ran back to the boarding house, but not to her room. She went to the kitchen pantry. High on the shelf, behind the flour sacks, was Samuel Hayes's old Winchester rifle. Edwin had brought it, intending to sell it or use it for parts. Kate took it down. It was heavy, smelling of oil and wood. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She had shot coyotes near the chicken coop. She had shot a rattlesnake once. She had never pointed a gun at a man. Tonight, she would point it at the world. The wind was howling again when she reached the jail. Tahan was standing by the door, as if he knew she would return. "Kate," he hissed when he saw the rifle. "What are you doing? I am breaking you out," she said, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. "You cannot do this." Tahan said urgency in his voice. "If you do this, there is no going back. You will be a criminal. You will be hunted. Your life here, the house, the safety. It will be gone. I do not want that life," Kate cried in a whisper, finding the key that fit the heavy padlock. "I do not want safety if it means living with a monster." She turned the key. The lock clicked open. She pulled the door wide. "Come out. Tahan." Tahan stood in the doorway. He looked at the rifle in her hands. He looked at her face, pale, determined, terrifyingly beautiful in her resolve. He stepped out. "You are a foolish woman," he said softly. "I'm sure of myself," she answered. They moved into the alley. "To the livery," Tahan whispered. "We need horses." They ran, keeping to the shadows. The wind whipped Kate's skirts around her legs. They were passing the back of the general store when a door opened. A man stepped out. A guard posted to watch the burned ruins. It was Miller. He had woken up and come out to relieve himself. He saw them. "Hey!" Miller shouted. "Hey, stop!" He fumbled for his gun. "Run!" Tahan yelled. He grabbed Kate's arm and pulled her behind a water trough just as Miller fired. The bullet splintered the wood inches from Kate's head, spraying her with water and splinters. Kate screamed. "Give me the rifle," Tahan commanded. Kate shoved the Winchester into his hands. Tahan rolled out from behind the trough. He leveled the rifle. He could have killed Miller. The man was standing in the open, silhouetted by the lantern light. A shot to the chest would have ended it. But Tahan remembered the look in Kate's eyes when he had stopped the scalping. He remembered the line he walked between man and monster. He aimed low. He fired. The bullet struck the wooden post of the store porch, right next to Miller's head, sending a shower of sparks and wood fragments into the man's face. Miller yelled, throwing his hands up and diving for cover behind a barrel. It was enough. "Move!" Tahan shouted. They scrambled up and ran. They reached the livery stable. The horses smelled their fear and stomped in their stalls. Tahan saddled the paint horse and the bay gelding in record time. His hands were a blur of motion. Kate threw open the stable doors. The town was waking up. Shouts were ringing out. Lights were flickering on in windows. They mounted. Tahan looked at her. "Are you ready, Catherine?" She gripped the reins. She heard Edwin's voice in her head. "You belong to me." She looked at the open gate, at the black void of the prairie beyond. "Yes," she said. They kicked the horses into a gallop. They burst out of the stable and thundered down the main street. A few shots rang out from the boardwalks, whizzing harmlessly overhead. They passed the hotel. They passed the saloon. They passed the boarding house where the blue silk dress lay crumpled on the floor. They rode past the last fence post and into the dark, wild embrace of the plains. Behind them, the bells of Split Rock began to ring, a frantic, angry alarm. But ahead of them, there was only the wind, the stars, and the terrified, exhilarating beat of two hearts running for their lives. The night did not end. It merely stretched, pulling tight across the vast emptiness of the plains like a drum skin. They rode until the horses were blown, lathered in sweat despite the biting cold. They rode until the lights of Split Rock were not even a memory, swallowed by the swallowing dark. The ground beneath the hooves changed from the packed dirt of the road to the wild, broken hardpan of the open range. Kate bent low over the neck of the bay gelding. Her hair had come fully loose, streaming behind her like a banner of war. The wind tore at her clothes, stinging her eyes, but she did not close them. She watched the back of the man riding ahead of her. Tahan rode the paint horse with a desperate urgency. He kept to the low ground, weaving through dry washes and beneath the skeletal branches of cottonwoods that lined the invisible creeks. He did not look back, trusting her to follow, trusting her to keep the pace. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit, the shouting men, the sporadic gunfire, had faded hours ago, eaten by the wind. But the silence that replaced it was not peaceful. It was heavy with the knowledge of what they had done. They were no longer a rancher's daughter and a scout. They were fugitives. The first gray smudges of dawn were bruising the eastern horizon when Tahan finally slowed. "The horses need rest," he called back, his voice hoarse, "or they will die under us." He guided them toward a jagged formation of rocks that rose from the plain like the teeth of a buried giant. It was a place of shadows and hidden crevices, defensible and secret. They dismounted in a narrow box canyon, hidden from the open flats. The horses stood with their heads low, their sides heaving like bellows. Kate slid from the saddle. Her legs gave way. She stumbled, catching herself against the rough stone of the canyon wall. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape was draining away, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion and a sharp, stinging pain across her back. Tahan was there in an instant. He did not ask if she was all right. He knew she was not. He took her arm, guiding her deeper into the rocks to a shallow overhang, a hollow similar to the one where they had sheltered from the storm days ago. Yet this one felt different. That first cave had been a refuge from the weather. This one was a refuge from the world. "Sit," he said gently. Kate sat on a flat shelf of rock. She shivered, though the air was still. She looked down at herself. The blue silk dress, the dress intended for her wedding, the dress Edwin had bought to mark her as his property, was ruined. The hem was shredded by briars. The bodice was stained with dust and horse sweat. And the back... She winced as she shifted. "You are hurt," Tahan said. He was standing over her. He had dropped the rifle in the saddlebags. In the gray light of the false dawn, he looked wilder than she had ever seen him. The bruise on his face from the jail was dark and angry. His buckskin shirt was torn at the shoulder. "It is nothing," Kate said, though the pain was sharp and hot. "Just a scratch. From the water trough. When the bullet hit..." "Let me see," Tahan said. He moved behind her. Kate felt his presence like a physical weight, a heat source in the cold morning. "The dress is torn," he said quietly. "There is blood." He touched the fabric near her shoulder blade. Kate hissed in a breath. "There is a splinter," Tahan said. "A shard of wood from the trough. It is deep. It must come out. Catherine, or it will fester." Kate stared at the canyon wall in front of her. She remembered the last time he had stood behind her like this. The storm, the cold, the shame she had felt at her own helplessness. She remembered begging him to help her because she could not help herself. But she was not helpless now. She had stolen keys. She had held a rifle. She had chosen to run into the dark. The pain in her back was throbbing, but deeper than the pain was a hunger she had suppressed for days, a hunger that had started in that first cave and grown through every look, every silence, every moment of shared danger. She realized, with a jolt that stopped her heart, that she did not want him to tend to her as a nurse. She did not want him to touch her with the careful, clinical detachment of a scout saving a stray. She wanted him to touch her as a man. She took a breath. The air tasted of sage and freedom. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see his shadow against the rock. "Unlace my dress. Tahan." The words hung in the air, clearer and stronger than the wind. Tahan went very still. His hands froze near her shoulder. Kate waited. She could hear the sound of his breathing, ragged and shallow. She could hear the blood rushing in her own ears. "Only if you are truly sure," he said. His voice was low, rough with a restraint that was fraying at the edges. It was the same question he had asked before, but the weight of it was different. Before, he had asked for permission to save her life. Now, he was asking for permission to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. He was asking if she was choosing this, choosing him, with all the ruin and risk that came with it. Kate closed her eyes. She thought of Edwin's grasping hands. She thought of the town's judgment. She thought of the years of fear she had lived, the years of holding herself apart, terrified of her own skin. Then she thought of Tahan standing in front of the mob. She thought of his hand holding hers through the jail bars. She opened her eyes. "I am sure," she whispered, "for the first time in my life. I am sure." Silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then she felt his fingers. They were not clinical this time. They were reverent. He found the top lace of the ruined bodice. He pulled it loose. His knuckles grazed the skin of her neck. A shiver ran through her. Not of cold, but of fire. He worked slowly, deliberately. He was unmaking the blue silk dress. He was unmaking the property of Edwin Caro. With every loosened string, the tightness in her chest unspooled. He pulled the laces free. The bodice went slack. He peeled the fabric down, exposing her shoulders to the cool air. He found the splinter, a jagged piece of wood lodged in the muscle near her spine. "This will hurt," he murmured. "Do it," she said. He gripped the wood. With a quick, precise movement, he pulled it free. Kate gasped, arching her back, a sharp cry escaping her lips. Immediate pressure followed, a cloth pressed against the wound to staunch the flow. But then the cloth was gone, replaced by his hand. His palm covered the wound, warm and rough. But he didn't stop there. His other hand moved to her waist, resting on the curve of her hip. Kate turned. The blanket she had been clutching slipped from her lap. She stood up, the dress falling to her waist. Holding it up with one hand against her chest, she faced him. They stood inches apart in the dim light. Tahan looked at her with an intensity that burned. He looked at her throat, her shoulders, her eyes. He did not look at her like a porcelain doll to be put on a shelf. He looked at her like she was the storm itself. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, brushing over the fading bruise Edwin had left. "Catherine," he breathed. Kate reached up. She tangled her fingers in his long, dark hair. She pulled him down. They kissed. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. His lips were soft, hesitant, terrified of breaking her. Kate made a sound low in her throat and pressed closer, her body aligning with his. She dropped her hand from her chest, letting the dress hang loose, trusting him to catch her. Tahan groaned, a sound of surrender. His arms went around her, pulling her crushed against him. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It tasted of dust and survival. It tasted of the years of loneliness they had both endured, finally ending. He broke the kiss, gasping, resting his forehead against hers. His hands were gripping her waist, steadying her trembling body. "Tell me to stop," he whispered roughly. "Say the word. Catherine?" Kate looked up at him. She saw the scars on his face. She saw the man who had carried the weight of two worlds and never broken. "Never," she said. "Do not stop." She pulled him back to the blankets he had spread on the stone floor. They sank down together, the fire of their bodies the only warmth in the vast, cold canyon. Outside, the wind moaned through the rocks, but inside the hollow, there was only the quiet, fierce claiming of two souls who had finally found their home in each other. The morning came with a silence so profound it felt like a ringing in the ears. Sunlight spilled into the hollow, turning the red rock to gold. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light. Kate woke slowly. She was warm. She lay against Tahan's chest, his arm heavy and protective across her waist. She could hear the steady, strong rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then the smell of sage and wood smoke brought it all back. She did not feel shame. She waited for it, the old, conditioned guilt, but it did not come. Instead, she felt a strange, fragile peace. The hollow inside her, the one she had tried to fill with duty and silence, was gone. Tahan stirred. His hand moved on her arm, a gentle, reassuring pressure. "You are awake," he murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. Kate pushed herself up on one elbow. She looked down at him. His hair was loose, spread like ink across the blanket. His face, usually so guarded, was open. "We have to go," she said softly. Tahan nodded. He sat up, the movement fluid despite his injuries. He looked out at the slice of blue sky visible through the overhang. "They will be tracking us," he said. "Edwin will not stop, not now." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "There is no going back. Catherine, the town, your family, they will treat you as dead. Or worse." "I know," she said. "I knew that when I turned the key." Tahan reached out and took her hand. "There are places," he said, "further west or south, into the mountains. There are settlements where the lines are not so sharp, where a man like me and a woman like you can live without hiding. But it will be hard. We will be poor. We will always be watching the horizon." Kate squeezed his hand. "I have been poor, Tahan, and I have spent my whole life watching the horizon, waiting for a life that never came." She looked at the ruined blue silk dress lying in the dust. "I would rather starve with you in a sod hut than eat roast beef at Edwin Caro's table. I would rather be hunted than owned." Tahan raised her hand to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, brushing his lips over the rough, work-worn skin. "Then we ride," he said. They gathered their meager belongings. Kate tore the hem from her dress to bind her hair. Tahan checked the Winchester. They mounted the horses in the bright, unforgiving light of the morning and turned their faces west. They rode for 3 days. The land changed beneath them. The flat plains gave way to rugged foothills, a landscape of sagebrush, rocky rises, and bone-white fallen logs that looked like the ribs of the earth. They moved carefully, staying off the skylines, watching their back trail. But the plains were vast, and they were only 2 specks in the immensity. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they were crossing a dry wash, a deep gash in the earth filled with tumbling tumbleweeds. The wind was whipping up, throwing grit into the air. Tahan stopped his horse suddenly. Kate pulled up beside him. "What is it?" Tahan did not answer. He spun his horse around, raising the rifle. "Run! Catherine! Get to the ridge!" Before Kate could move, a gunshot cracked from the lip of the wash. Dirt sprayed up near the paint horse's hooves. Above them, on the rim of the arroyo, 5 riders appeared. It was Edwin. He sat on his black stallion, looking down at them like a judge from on high. Beside him was the sheriff, looking weary and reluctant, and 3 men Kate did not know, hard-eyed men with dusters and tied-down holsters. Hired guns. "End of the line. Scout!" Edwin shouted. Tahan moved his horse in front of Kate, shielding her with his body. "Let her go!" "Caro!" Tahan yelled back. "It is me you want!" Edwin laughed, a sound that was lost in the wind. "I want what is mine." He spurred his horse, sliding down the steep bank into the wash. The other men followed, feigning out to block the exit. It was a standoff. The wind howled around them, snapping the manes of the horses. Edwin pulled his horse up 10 yards away. He looked at Kate. He looked at her torn dress, her loose hair, the wildness in her face. His expression twisted into something ugly. "You look like a squaw." He spat. "I look like a free woman." Kate answered, her voice steady. "Come here. Catherine," Edwin commanded. "Step away from him. We will say he abducted you. We will say he forced you. We can still salvage your name." Kate laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. "Abducted? I broke him out. Edwin, I stole the keys. I chose this." She kicked her horse forward, moving up beside Tahan. She squared her shoulders. "I chose him," she said clearly. "I love him." The silence that followed was absolute. Edwin's face turned a mottled purple. The hired guns glanced at each other, uneasy. "You love him?" Edwin choked out. "You love the animal who stole my cattle? He saved my life!" Kate shouted. "And he is twice the man you are." Edwin's hand dropped to his gun. "Kill him," he ordered the men. "Kill the savage." One of the hired guns raised a rifle. Tahan reacted with the speed of a striking snake. He shoved Kate hard, knocking her from her saddle. Down. As Kate hit the sand, Tahan fired. His shot hit the hired gun in the shoulder, spinning him around. The wash erupted in gunfire. Kate scrambled for cover behind a fallen log. She saw Tahan's horse rear. She saw Tahan fire again, grazing the sheriff's arm. But there were too many of them. A shot rang out, louder than the rest. Tahan jerked in the saddle. A bloom of red appeared on his side, soaking the buckskin. He slumped forward, clutching the horn of the saddle. But he did not fall. He tried to raise the rifle again. "Stop!" Kate screamed the word. She scrambled up from the sand. She ran, not away from the fire, but into it. She threw herself between Edwin and Tahan. She stood in front of the paint horse, her arms spread wide, her chest heaving. "Shoot me then!" she screamed at Edwin. Edwin froze. His pistol was leveled at Tahan, but Kate was directly in the line of fire. "Move, Catherine!" Edwin shouted. "Move aside so I can put the dog down." "No!" Kate cried. "If you want to kill him, you have to kill me first. You want to own me, Edwin? You want to possess me? Then take my life, because that is the only way you will ever touch me again." Edwin's hand wavered. He stared at her. He saw the absolute resolve in her eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was not a thing to be broken. She was a wall he could not breach. The hired guns lowered their weapons. They were paid to fight men, not to shoot unarmed women standing in front of their lovers. "Sheriff," Edwin barked. "Shoot him." The sheriff was clutching his grazed arm. He looked at Tahan, bleeding in the saddle. He looked at Kate, standing like an avenging angel in the dust. And he looked at Edwin, a man consumed by a petty, vicious hate. The sheriff holstered his gun. "No," the sheriff said. "What?" Edwin turned on him. "I gave you an order. I am the law here." "Caro, not you," the sheriff said. His voice tired. "And the law says we hang men for crimes, not for stealing hearts." He looked at Tahan. "Did you burn the storehouse, son? Look me in the eye." Tahan raised his head. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. "No," Tahan rasped. "I did not." The sheriff nodded. He looked at the dead family at the river in his mind's eye. He looked at the blood on Tahan's shirt. "I believe you," the sheriff said. He turned to Edwin. "It is over. Mr. Caro, we have no proof, and too much blood has been spilled on this ground already. I am going home." Edwin stared at the sheriff. He looked at his hired men, who were backing away. He looked at Kate. He lowered his gun. The hate in his eyes cooled into a cold, hard stone. "You are dead to me," he said to Kate. "You are dead to the town. Do not ever come back. If I see you on my land, I will shoot you for trespassing." Kate looked at him. "I do not intend to come back. Edwin, I have nothing there." Edwin holstered his pistol. He yanked his horse around and rode up the bank without looking back. The sheriff and the hired men followed, leaving only the dust settling in the wind. Kate turned to Tahan. He was swaying in the saddle. She grabbed his leg to steady him. "Tahan?" He looked down at her. A faint smile touched his lips. "You are a very difficult woman to protect. Miss Hayes." Kate let out a sob that was half a laugh. She helped him down from the horse. She tore the last clean strip from her petticoat and bound his wound. It was a through-and-through shot, painful but not fatal if they kept it clean. "Can you ride?" she asked. "I can ride," he said, gritting his teeth. He mounted again, heavily. Kate climbed onto her bay. They rode out of the wash. They rode west, toward the setting sun. The journey was hard. They faced dust storms that turned the day into night. They faced cold rains that chilled them to the bone. They rode through miles of emptiness where the only sound was the wind in the grass. But the miles belonged to them. Tahan grew stronger as the wound healed. Kate grew tougher, her skin browning in the sun, her hands growing calloused on the reins. They camped under the stars, sharing a blanket not out of necessity, but out of a need to be close, to feel the other person breathing, to know that they were real. 4 days later, they stopped at a small trading post, a sod shack clinging to the edge of a creek. The trader, a man with one eye and a beard like a bird's nest, sold them flour and coffee. He did not ask questions. He saw the way the white woman looked at the Comanche man, and he saw the way the man watched the door while she ate. He knew the story without being told. "There is a valley," the trader said, pointing a gnarled finger toward the blue mountains in the distance. "About 2 days' ride. High up, good water. Some mixed folks up there. They don't ask about the past, only about how hard you can work." They rode for 2 more days. They found the valley at sunset. It was a narrow ribbon of green, tucked between the shoulders of the hills. A creek, clear and cold. Cut through the center, cottonwood trees, their leaves turning gold with the season, stood like sentinels along the banks. It was quiet. It was hidden. They stopped their horses on the ridge overlooking the water. Tahan looked at the land. He looked at the water. "The soil is good," he said quietly. "We could plant corn, maybe raise a few horses." Kate looked at the trees. "We could build a cabin," she said, "near the cottonwoods." Tahan turned to her. He reached out and took her hand. "It will be hard, Catherine. The winter will be cold. The work will never end, and people will always talk, even here." Kate looked at him. She traced the lines of his palm with her thumb. She imagined the seasons ahead. She imagined the droughts and the storms. She imagined the children they might have, children who would belong to 2 worlds and neither. She looked into his dark eyes, the eyes that had seen so much death and yet had learned to look at her with such gentleness. "Let them talk," she said. She squeezed his hand. "In this place, we decide who we are, not them, us." Tahan smiled. It was a full smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. "Us," he repeated. They kicked their horses forward, riding down the slope toward the water. The story ends there, at the edge of the creek, as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and gold. They dismounted and stood together, the wind tugging at her loose hair and his braids. They stood with their fingers interlaced, facing the vast, indifferent west, not as enemies, not as captive and savior, but as 2 wounded souls who had found the only thing worth surviving for. They chose, again and again, to love in spite of everything. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope the journey of Kate and Tahan resonated with you. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you call home. If you enjoyed this tale of the frontier, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of survival, romance, and the untamed American landscape. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. I read every one of them. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.